Daniel Carter slammed both hands on the counter and looked the diner manager dead in the eye. She eats. Tonight. End of discussion. He had $11 left in his wallet. Enough for one meal, his and Lily's. He pushed every single bill across the counter without blinking. The little girl behind him hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. Just shivered. Nobody in that diner moved to help her. Nobody except a man who could barely help himself. What Daniel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the child he'd just spent his last dollar feeding had a mother who held the power to give him back everything he'd lost. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. If it moves you, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next. The rain had been falling since 4 o'clock. The kind of cold, relentless Texas rain that doesn't announce itself, it just arrives and stays, soaking everything it touches without apology. Daniel Carter pulled his truck into the gravel lot of Rudy's roadside diner at 7:42 p.m. Engine ticking as it cooled, wipers still slapping back and forth, even after he cut the ignition. He sat there for a moment, with both hands on the wheel, staring at the neon open sign buzzing in the window, like it was the only warm thing left in the world. His back hurt. It had hurt for 3 days straight, not the kind of hurt you complain about, the kind you just absorb and carry, like everything else you can't put down. Dad, Lily's voice came from the back seat, quiet, careful, the way 9-year-olds speak when they've learned to read a room. Are we going in? Yeah, baby, he exhaled. We're going in. He checked the glove compartment out of habit wallet. $11. A crumpled receipt from the gas station. He'd already done the math 3 times. A grilled cheese and a bowl of tomato soup for Lily. Coffee for him. Maybe a piece of cornbread if the total came in under 10. He'd eaten a granola bar at 2 o'clock and told himself it was enough. It wasn't enough, but you don't say that out loud when your daughter is watching your face for signs. Lily had her mother's eyes. Sarah's eyes wide and dark and full of something that saw more than it should. Daniel had noticed, in the 2 years since the accident, that Lily had started watching him the same way Sarah used to. Like she was reading the weather. Like she was quietly deciding whether or not to worry. He didn't want her to worry, so he got out of the truck, walked around to her door, opened it, and held out his hand like they were staying in place, ordinary. Like this was just dinner. Like everything was fine. Lily took his hand and jumped down from the running board. Can I get hot chocolate? She asked. He did the math again, faster this time. Let's see how hungry we are first. She didn't push. She never pushed, and somehow that was the hardest part. They were almost to the door, when Lily stopped walking. Daniel felt the tug on his hand first. That sudden stillness that children do when something interrupts the frequency of a moment. He turned to look at her, and she was staring at something to the left of the entrance, just past the yellow circle of the porch light. A girl. She was sitting on the concrete edge of a planter box that had been filled with dead marigolds since October, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. She looked about Lily's age, maybe a year younger, maybe the same. She was wearing a light canvas jacket, completely unsuited for a night like this, and her dark hair was soaked flat against her face. She wasn't crying. That was the first thing Daniel noticed. She was past crying. She was just still, in the way that people get still when they've used everything up. Dad, Lily whispered. I see her. He stood there for 3 seconds, long enough to check himself. Long enough to think about the $11, the coffee he wasn't going to drink, the math that was already tight. Long enough to think about everything responsible and practical. Then he walked over. He crouched down to the girl's level, which made his knees protest, and he kept his voice easy so she wouldn't startle. Hey there, you doing okay? The girl looked at him. Her eyes were careful in the way a child's eyes get when they've learned that strangers are not automatically safe. She didn't answer right away. Are you waiting for someone? He asked. She hesitated. Then she shook her head. Are you hungry? A pause. Smaller this time. And then the tiniest nod, one sharp little dip of her chin that she seemed almost embarrassed about, like admitting it was a defeat. Daniel straightened up and looked at his daughter. Lily was already unzipping her jacket. He put a hand on her arm gently, not stopping her, just making sure she was sure. Lily looked up at him with her mother's eyes and said, with complete seriousness, "She's cold, Dad." That was the entire argument. That was all Lily needed to say. He let go of her arm. Lily crossed the 3 feet between them and held the jacket out to the girl with both hands. The way you offer something you actually want to give. Here, she said. I've got a sweater on underneath. I'm okay. The girl stared at the jacket like she wasn't sure it was real. It's dry, Lily added helpfully. Mostly. Something shifted in the girl's face, not quite a smile, but the space where one had been before. She reached out and took the jacket. I'm Lily. That's my dad. Sophie, the girl said, so quietly it was almost lost to the rain. Sophie. Daniel nodded. You want to come inside and get warm? The warmth of the diner hit them like a wall, that particular kind of diner warmth that smells like coffee and bacon grease and something sweetly fried. The kind that makes a cold body involuntarily exhale. The booths were mostly empty. 2 old men at the counter nursing coffee. A couple in a window booth, not speaking to each other. A waitress mid-40s, sensible shoes. Name tag that said Carol, who looked up when the 3 of them came in. Carol's eyes moved from Daniel to Lily to Sophie, and Daniel watched the calculation happen behind her expression. He'd worked in enough workplaces to know when someone was about to draw a line. He didn't wait for her to draw it. Table for 3, he said. Easy. Matter of fact. Like there was no other possible interpretation of the situation. Carol hesitated. She looked at Sophie again, the wet hair, the borrowed jacket. The stillness that said this child has been sitting outside for a while, and her jaw shifted in a way that meant she was deciding something. Sir, she said, lowering her voice and taking a small step toward him. That little girl was in here about 40 minutes ago. She stopped, rephrased, she can't pay. I know, Daniel said, she's with me. Carol blinked. You know her? I do now. He held Carol's gaze steadily. The way you hold a door open, no threat, no anger. Just presence. Like this was settled. Like there was nothing left to discuss. Carol looked at him for another beat. Then she grabbed 3 menus and said, "Follow me," and led them to a booth near the back where the radiator was working hardest. Daniel slid in across from the 2 girls and opened his menu without looking at the prices, because he already knew them, and because he needed to look calm. Sophie sat very still. She held the menu like she wasn't sure she was allowed to read it. Order what you want, Daniel told her. Don't worry about it. Sophie's eyes came up over the top of the menu. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. Lily was already pointing at the hot chocolate section with one finger, like she was making a business proposal. Sophie, they put real whipped cream on it, like real. Sophie looked at Lily, then back at the menu. Something quiet moved to Kakrah's face, that specific kind of relief that children feel when a safe thing happens unexpectedly, when kindness arrives without conditions attached. Okay, Sophie said softly, while the girls talked, Lily doing most of the talking, which was how it always went. Daniel sat back in the booth and let himself be still for a moment. He had learned to do that over the past 8 months. To find the 30-second pockets inside a day when nothing was actively demanding something from him, and to just be inside them. To breathe. To not think about the stack of bills on the kitchen counter, or the voicemail from the utility company he hadn't returned, or the way his neighbor Marcus had looked at him last week with something that might have been pity and might have been something worse. 8 months. That was how long it had been since everything collapsed. Before that, Daniel Carter had been not wealthy, not powerful, not anyone the world would write a story about, but solid. That was the word people used. Solid. Reliable. Kind of man you wanted checking your warehouse before your workers walked in, because he would actually check it. He would walk every aisle, read every report, flag every shortcut, and file every concern in writing, with the date and time attached. He was the kind of man who believed that the system worked, that if you did your job right, if you documented everything, if you spoke up when something was wrong, the system would recognize that. He had been wrong about the system. He understood that now. 8 months ago, Daniel had been the senior safety inspector at Viridian Logistics, the largest single supplier in a corporate network he hadn't known much about at the time. He'd been there 6 years. He'd never missed a report. He'd never looked the other way on a violation. He'd been proud of that, not in a chest-puffed way, but in the quiet internal way of a man who knows he does his job right. And then the Harris Creek expansion happened. He'd seen it coming 4 months before it blew up. The new warehouse district they were building outside of Harris Creek was moving too fast, corners being cut on load-bearing specs, fire suppression systems delayed because the subcontractor was behind, forklift operators being certified in 3 days instead of the required 12. Daniel had filed 7 separate reports. 7. He had the timestamps. He had the email receipts showing they'd been received. But the expansion was on a tight deadline. There was money attached to that deadline, real money, the kind that made executives anxious in boardrooms. And Daniel, with his reports and his documentation and his inconvenient insistence on doing things right, had become the problem. Richard Hale had called him into his office on a Tuesday morning. Richard was the operations director, a tall man with a handshake that said, "I played golf with your boss's boss," and a way of smiling that never quite reached his eyes. Daniel had never trusted the smile. He'd never had evidence for it, just the instinct, the particular kind of stillness that came over him whenever Richard entered a room. "Daniel," Richard had said, settling into his chair with the ease of a man who had never spent a moment uncertain about his place in any room. "I'll be direct with you. The team is concerned." "Which team?" Daniel asked. "Leadership." Richard set his hands flat on the desk. "Your reports over the last quarter have created significant delays on the Harris Creek project. We have contractual obligations. When one inspector is generating more flagged items than the entire rest of the department combined, it raises questions. It raises questions because the rest of the department isn't looking closely enough," Daniel said. He'd kept his voice level. He was proud of that. "I can walk you through every report. Every item I flagged is a legitimate safety issue. Some of them are serious." "Or," Richard said, and here the smile appeared, "warm and final, you have a pattern of obstruction. I'm not saying that's what this is. I'm telling you how it looks." Daniel stared at him. "How it looks? People are watching, Daniel. You have a strong record. We'd hate to see this become something it doesn't need to be." It was the most elegant threat Daniel had ever received. No raised voice, no specific accusation, just the shape of consequences arranged carefully in the air between them, like furniture. He'd gone back to his desk. He'd documented that meeting too, wrote it up in an email to himself with the time and date, the way he always did. Then he'd gone home to Lily and made dinner and read her 3 chapters of Charlotte's Web, and tried to convince himself that documentation was armor. It wasn't armor. 6 weeks later, a storage rack failure in the Harris Creek warehouse injured 2 workers. Daniel was removed from his position the next morning. The official record said he had failed to properly document inspection protocols for that section of the facility. He had documented them. He had the emails. He had everything. It didn't matter. Richard Hale controlled the narrative. And in the world of corporate liability, the narrative is the only thing that's real. "Dad." He came back to the diner booth. Lily was looking at him with her mother's eyes. "You were doing the thing," she said. "What thing?" "The faraway thing." "Sorry, Bug." Sophie was watching him with a kind of careful attention that he recognized it was the same attention Lily had developed, the kind that children develop when they've learned that adults sometimes carry things they don't talk about. "Are you okay?" Sophie asked him. It was such a direct question from such a young person that it startled him slightly. Most adults didn't ask that. They asked, "How are you?" with their eyes already sliding away, already composing the next sentence, already not listening for the answer. Sophie asked it, with her whole face turned toward him, waiting. "I'm good," he said. Then he stopped, looked at her. Something about the directness of the question made him want to answer it honestly. "I've had a hard year," he said, "but I'm good. You?" Sophie considered this. "I got lost," she said. "I was at the gas station down the road, and she stopped. Someone was supposed to come, get me, and they didn't come." "How long were you outside?" Daniel asked. "I don't know." "A while. Do you have a phone?" She shook her head. "I had one, but the battery died." He nodded slowly. "Do you know your mom's number? Your dad's?" Sophie's face shifted. "Just slightly, my mom," she said. "Good. We'll call her after we eat. She's probably worried sick." Sophie looked down at the table. "She is," she said quietly. "She's always worried. She just doesn't always show it." Daniel filed that away without comment. Carol came back with the hot chocolates too for the girls, coffee for him, and, without being asked, a small plate of cornbread that she set in the center of the table, with a look that said, "Don't make a big deal of it." Daniel caught her eye and gave her a nod. She moved away without a word. Lily pulled the cornbread toward the center. "Okay, we have to do it properly," she announced to Sophie, with the authority of someone who had cornbread opinions. "You break it, not cut it. And you do not put butter on it until you're ready to eat that piece, or it gets soggy." Sophie looked at Lily like she had never met someone who cared this deeply about cornbread logistics. "My mom we don't really do diners," Sophie said. "Where do you go?" Sophie thought about this. "Restaurants. But like, the kind where the menu doesn't have pictures." Lily frowned at this information. "How do you know what the food looks like?" "You just know, I guess." "That seems stressful." Sophie laughed. It was small and a little surprised, like she hadn't expected it to come out. Daniel watched it happen, and something in his chest moved, not sadness exactly, more like the recognition of something. A child remembering, briefly, how to be a child. He borrowed Carol's phone, his own was dead, which was becoming a recurring theme, and handed it to Sophie after she'd eaten half a grilled cheese and most of the soup. Sophie dialed from memory. 6 digits in, she paused, then completed the number. It rang twice. Then a voice answered, and even from across the table, Daniel could hear it. He couldn't make out words, but he could hear the quality of the voice, the way it broke slightly on the first syllable, the controlled panic underneath the composure, the sound of a person who had been holding themselves together by pure will and was now finally letting go. Sophie's eyes closed for a second. "Mom," she said. I'm okay. A pause. "I'm at a diner. Someone help me." Another pause. "I don't know." She looked at Daniel. Daniel told her the name of the diner in the crossroads. She repeated it. 20 minutes, Sophie said. "Then I know." "I know, Mom. I'm sorry." She held the phone for a moment, after she said goodbye like she wasn't sure it was over. Then she set it on the table and looked at Daniel. "She's coming," she said. "Good. She'll want to pay you back." "She's like that." Daniel shook his head. "No need." Sophie looked at him seriously. "You don't know my mom." "Doesn't matter who your mom is," Daniel said. "We're neighbors tonight. That's all." Sophie stared at him for a long moment with that unnerving directness. "I don't think we've ever had neighbors like you," she said. He expected a worried mother, a relieved woman in practical clothes, who would hug her daughter too hard, say thank you 3 times, press some money into his hand that he would try to refuse, and then disappear into the rain. He was prepared for that. He had even thought of what to say, just doing what anyone would do. "Glad she's safe. Have a good night." What pulled into the gravel lot 17 minutes later was not what he expected. It was a black SUV, not ostentatious, but the kind of clean, quiet, deliberate vehicle that said money, that doesn't need to announce itself. It parked with the precision of someone who was used to arriving, not rushing, never rushing. The woman who got out of the passenger side moved fast, though. Whatever composure the vehicle implied, it broke the moment she saw Sophie through the diner window. She came through the door the way water moves through a broken dam, contained until the exact moment it isn't. She crossed the diner in 8 strides and pulled Sophie against her, without a word, arms wrapped completely around her daughter's head. Eyes closed, the whole world reduced for one moment to the fact that her child was there, and warm and okay. Sophie disappeared into the embrace. Her arms went around her mother's waist and she held on. Nobody in the diner spoke. Daniel looked down at his coffee. He gave them the moment. When the woman finally pulled back hands on Sophie's face, checking her, cataloging her with a mother's specific urgency, Daniel looked up and got his first clear view. She was in her early 40s, he guessed. Dark hair pulled back at the neck. No jewelry except a watch that probably cost more than his truck, but wore like a habit rather than a statement. The kind of face that had learned to be composed so thoroughly that the composure had become the face except in the last 60 seconds, when he'd seen what was underneath it. She looked at Sophie's borrowed jacket, Lily's jacket, with the small embroidered turtle on the collar that Sarah had put there because Lily loves turtles. Daniel, just let her love turtles, and something flickered across her expression. Then she turned to Daniel. "You helped her." "It wasn't a question. We just brought her inside," Daniel said. "Lily's idea, mostly." The woman's gaze moved to Lily, who was eating the last of the cornbread with great seriousness. and appeared unbothered by the drama. "Hi," Lily said without looking up. "Your daughter's really smart. We talked about a lot of things." The woman blinked. "Did you?" She said she doesn't understand diners. I explained them. Something moved across the woman's face. Not quite a smile, too startled for a smile, but the space where one was arriving. She held out her hand to Daniel. "Victoria Mitchell." He shook it. "Daniel Carter."
Mr. Carter.
She looked at him the way people look at something they're trying to read. "You don't have to," he said. "I'm going to anyway." She held his gaze. "Sophie is everything to me. I don't take tonight lightly." "Neither do I," Daniel said. "But she was a kid who needed help. There's nothing complicated about that." Victoria Mitchell looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that evaluates, weighs, measures. He'd been looked at a lot of ways in the past 8 months. This was different. This was not pity, not judgment, not the vaguely uncomfortable look people gave him when they'd heard the story and weren't sure which version was true. This was the look of someone deciding something. "Can I at least?" she started. "No," he said, gently but clearly. "Thank you, really." But another pause. "You have no idea who I am," she said. It was half statement, half question. "Should I?" She studied him. "Most people do." "I've been a little offline lately," Daniel said. Dry, not unkind, she looked at him for one more beat. Then she looked at Lily, who had finished the cornbread, and was now telling Sophie something in a whisper that made Sophie's eyes go wide. Then she looked back at Daniel with an expression he couldn't quite read, composed, thoughtful, and underneath that, something that looked almost like recognition. "Let me buy dinner," Victoria said. "At least that." He started to shake his head. "I'm not asking to repay a debt," she said. "I'm asking to sit at a table with the people who helped my daughter for 20 minutes as a neighbor." She used his own word, deliberately, and the corners of her mouth moved slightly. Daniel looked at his coffee cup, looked at Lily, looked at this woman who was watching him like he was a puzzle she'd already decided she wanted to solve. 20 minutes, he said. She pulled off her coat and sat down. 40 minutes later, they were still there. Lily was teaching Sophie a card game she had invented herself, the rules of which appeared to change every 3 turns, in ways that were convenient for Lily. Sophie didn't seem to mind. She was laughing. Actually laughing, shoulders back, eyes bright, the real kind. Victoria Mitchell sat across from Daniel with a coffee that had gone mostly cold and watched her daughter laugh. "She doesn't do that," Victoria said quietly. "Not to Daniel, exactly. More to the air between them. Laugh like that." A pause. "It's been a long time." Daniel didn't say anything. He understood things like that. "You live nearby?" Victoria asked. "Fulton Heights," he said. "About 12 miles. And you were out here because we try to do Thursday dinners out. Treat for Lily. I do night deliveries Friday through Sunday. So Thursday is the last good night." He kept his voice easy. No performance of struggle, just facts. Victoria nodded. Didn't ask the obvious follow-up questions. He noticed that. Most people ask the follow-ups. "It's just the 2 of you?" she asked instead. "Her mother passed 2 years ago." "I'm sorry, thank you." "Sophie's father," she started, then stopped. "Also gone. 7 years." "I'm sorry," he said. "Thank you." They sat with that for a moment. The particular truce of 2 people who understood the specific grammar of loss. "What do you do?" Victoria asked. He could have deflected. He was practiced at deflecting. But something about the directness of the evening, Sophie's directness, Lily's directness, the whole bare-knuckle honesty of the last 2 hours, made deflection feel wrong. "I used to be a safety inspector," he said. "Industrial and warehouse. Good at it." He set his cup down. 8 months ago, I was fired. There was a situation. I documented it wrong, according to the official record. I don't agree with the official record." He kept his voice neutral, clinical. "I work nights now, grocery delivery, days I do what I can." Victoria was quiet. "I'm looking," he added. "It's slower than you'd expect." "In your field?" He nodded. "Why slower?" He looked at her. "The official record tends to follow you." Something shifted in her expression. Slight, careful. "Who was your employer?" "Viridian Logistics." A pause. Tiny, nearly undetectable. "Tell me something," Victoria said. Her voice had changed. Not dramatically. Not enough that you'd notice unless you were paying attention. But the quality of it was different. More precise. More deliberate. "When you filed these reports, the ones that are in dispute, did you keep copies?" Daniel looked at her. Every single one, he said. Time-stamped. Sent to 3 separate addresses. Victoria looked down at her coffee cup, then back up at him. Good, she said, just that one word. Daniel didn't know why it felt significant. He found out later. They stay and clean up their space, old habit, courtesy, the thing your grandmother instills in you, until it becomes automatic. He left Carol a tip that was probably too large given the math, but Carol had put the cornbread on the table without being asked, and that mattered. Outside, the rain had eased to a mist. Victoria's driver had pulled the SUV to the curb. Sophie stood between the 2 girls, Lily's jacket still on her shoulders, doing something with their hands that looked like a handshake Lily had apparently invented on the spot. You have to say the word, Lily was instructing. What word? Thunderbird, and then you snap, like this. Sophie practiced the snap. Got it on the second try. Good, Lily said, deeply satisfied. Now we're officially friends. It's binding. Sophie laughed again. Victoria watched, and Daniel watched Victoria watch, and there was something in her face in that moment open and unguarded in a way that the rest of the evening had not been that struck him as the truest version of her he'd seen. She turned to him, Mr. Carter. She reached into her jacket and produced a card, small, white, minimal. 2 lines of text, a phone number, nothing else. If anything changes with your situation, she said, call this number. You said this wasn't about repayment, he said. It isn't. She held the card out. Her eyes were direct. Take it anyway. He took it. Sophie hugged Lily without being prompted, wrapped both arms around her, quick and fierce. Then she looked at Daniel and said, with her old woman's seriousness, thank you for not walking past me. Daniel crouched down to her level. Nobody should have to be invisible, he said, especially not a kid. Sophie nodded, like he had confirmed something she had already decided to believe. Victoria's hand rested briefly on Daniel's forearm. As she passed him, not a handshake, not a hug, just a touch that said, I see you, in a way that words hadn't quite managed. And then she walked to the SUV, and Sophie climbed in, and they pulled out of the gravel lot and disappeared into the mist. In the truck heading home, Lily was quiet for about 4 minutes. This was unusual. Then she said, Dad, do you think they'll be okay? I think Sophie's going to be fine, Daniel said. She's got a good mom. Sophie said her mom is very busy. Moms have a lot to handle. Lily considered this. Sophie said she misses eating dinner together. A pause. Like us. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. The wipers moved back and forth. We should have them over sometime, Lily said. Matter-of-factly. Like she'd just decided it, and it was now simply a matter of scheduling. We'll see, Bug, Dad. Yeah, you did a good thing tonight. He didn't answer right away. He thought about the $11, about the granola bar at 2 o'clock, about the stack of bills on the kitchen counter and Richard Hale's file on his professional record, and the 7 reports nobody had acted on, and the 2 workers who got hurt, and the job he'd done right that the official record said he'd done wrong. He thought about Carol's cornbread and the way Sophie had laughed and the card in his shirt pocket that he hadn't looked at again, but could feel through the fabric. We did a good thing, he said. You gave her your jacket. She was cold, yeah, Daniel said. She was cold. Lily leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes, and Daniel drove them home through the mist, and the card stayed in his pocket, and he did not know, could not have known, that the woman who had pressed it into his hand was already on her phone in the back of that black SUV, already asking questions, already beginning to pull at a thread that 8 months of silence and 1 quiet act of kindness had finally put in reach. He didn't know. But something, some old, battered, stubborn thing in him that had survived 2 years of grief and 8 months of injustice knew that the night hadn't been ordinary. He didn't know the shape of what was coming. He just drove home and trusted that, being the kind of man you raised yourself to be, was never, even when it looked like it, entirely wasted. The card sat on Daniel's kitchen counter for 3 days. He didn't throw it away. He didn't call the number. He set it next to the stack of bills, the electric, the water, the past due notice from the insurance company that he'd been reading and rereading, like somehow the numbers would change if he looked long enough, and he went about the business of surviving. Friday night he did his grocery deliveries. Saturday night the same. Sunday he took Lily to the public library because it was warm and free, and Lily loved it, without him having to explain why those two qualities mattered right now. She picked out 4 books, which was the library's limit, and spent 20 minutes negotiating with the librarian, a patient woman named Ms. Arlene, about whether audiobooks counted toward the total. They did not. Lily accepted this verdict with the dignity of a senator conceding a close race. On the drive home, she said, "I think Sophie would like Ms. Arlene." Daniel said, "I told Sophie about the library." She said, she'd never been to a public library. He glanced in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean, never?" She said, "They have a library at home, with a ladder on wheels." Daniel drove in silence for a moment. A ladder on wheels, for the tall shelves. She said it was fun to push herself around on it. Lily paused. "That does sound fun, actually." "Yeah," Daniel said. "It does." He thought about the card. He didn't call it. Not because he was proud. He had run out of the particular luxury of pride, somewhere around month 4, but because he had learned, in 8 months of trying to navigate the wreckage of his career, that people who offered help in moments of emotion did not always mean it in the daylight. That the gap between a sincere gesture and a returned phone call was wider than it looked. He had filled out 17 job applications since January. He had received 4 responses. He had gone on 2 interviews, both of which had gone well until they hadn't, until someone in HR had pulled his Viridian file and the temperature in the room had changed in that specific way that told him everything without saying anything. So he didn't call. He went to work. He came home. He made sure Lily ate and did her homework and went to bed at a reasonable hour and never, not once, felt like the thing holding them together was cracking. He was good at not showing the crack. Tuesday morning, his phone rang. He was in the truck, about to pull out of the driveway for a daytime shift loading inventory at a garden supply warehouse. Cash work, off the books, not what he was trained for, but the kind of thing you say yes to, without hesitation, when the math requires it. The number on the screen was unfamiliar. Area code 512. Austin. He answered it, the way he answered everything these days, neutral, ready for it to be either nothing or something bad. "Mr. Carter." He recognized the voice immediately. Precise, composed. Underneath the composure, something moving fast. "Mitchell," he said. A beat. Like she hadn't expected him to remember her name from a single introduction at a roadside diner. "I want to ask you something," Victoria said. "And I want you to answer it honestly, even if the honest answer sounds ambitious." He turned the truck off. "Okay. The safety reports you filed at Viridian. The ones they say you didn't file correctly. How many were there?" 7, he said without hesitation. "Filed over a 14-week period between March and June. The last one was 43 days before the rack failure." Silence. "And you have documentation," she said. It wasn't quite a question. Timestamped emails, sent to my direct supervisor, the regional safety director, and a blind copy to my personal account so there'd be an independent record. A pause. I knew something was wrong. I was being careful. More silence, longer this time. "Mr. Carter," Victoria said. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay on the line while I do. I'm not going anywhere." He heard her exhale, controlled, measured, the breath of someone who had been sitting on information and was now choosing, deliberately, to release it. "Mitchell Global Industries," she said, "is the parent company of 3 subsidiaries. One of those subsidiaries is the primary holding entity for Viridian Logistics." The world went very still inside the truck cab. "You own Viridian," Daniel said. "My company does," she said. "I have since the acquisition 4 years ago. I do not manage day-to-day operations. I have division heads for that." A pause. "One of whom is Richard Hale." Daniel said nothing. He put his hand flat on the steering wheel and looked through the windshield at the driveway, and breathed. "I want to be very clear," Victoria said, her voice careful and even. "I did not know about your case. My office receives summary reports on HR matters above a certain threshold. Wrongful terminations, large settlements, litigation risk. Your case was classified as a performance dismissal. It did not reach my desk." "Because Richard Hale controlled the classification," Daniel said. "Yes, short, certain. I believe that is exactly what happened." Another silence. Daniel realized his jaw was tight and made himself unclench it. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. "Because I looked you up after Thursday night," Victoria said. I had my assistant pull everything available. Your employment record, the incident report from Harris Creek, the OSHA filing, the internal investigation summary. A pause. And then I pulled the original emails you referenced in your appeal. The appeal that was denied. Daniel waited. Your emails exist, Mr. Carter. They are in Viridian's system. They were received. They were read. Her voice did not rise, but something underneath it did, something that had the quality of controlled anger, the kind that has been turned inward and refined into something cold and precise. And they were deliberately excluded from the investigation documentation. The sound Daniel made was not quite a word. It was the sound a man makes when something he has known for 8 months, something he has been told was his own distorted memory, his bitterness, his inability to accept consequences, is confirmed by someone who has no reason to lie to him. I have a legal team, Victoria said. I want to open an internal review, but I need your permission and your cooperation. And I need to know, before I put this in motion, whether you are prepared for what that process looks like. What does it look like? It looks like Richard Hale fighting it. He will. He has allies on the board, and he has been with the company longer than I have. She said this with the flatness of someone reciting a physical fact. It looks like your name being in documents and depositions and potentially in media coverage if this goes where I think it goes. It looks like the thing you've been trying to move past, becoming, temporarily, the most visible thing about you. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He thought about the 7 reports. He thought about the 2 workers who had been injured, one of whom he'd heard secondhand, had a shoulder that had never healed right. He thought about the way Richard Hale had smiled across the desk at him and said how it looks. Like truth was just a matter of optics, like Daniel's 7 documented concerns were nothing more than an inconvenient aesthetic. I've been moving past a lie, Daniel said, not past the truth. There's a difference. Victoria Mitchell said nothing for 3 seconds. Then there is. When do we start, he asked. She said, I need 48 hours to assemble the team and establish the review parameters. I'll have someone contact you by Thursday. Another pause. And Mr. Carter, I want to be clear about something else. Go ahead. I would be doing this regardless of Thursday night, she said. Because what was done to you was wrong, and what Richard Hale did puts other workers at risk, and those things matter to me, independent of any personal connection. A pause. But I also want you to know that Sophie told me what Lily said to her, about nobody having to be cold when someone can help. Her voice was steady, but something had shifted in the texture of it. I don't have a lot of people around me who think that way anymore. I wanted you to know that it was noticed. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He sat in the truck in the driveway and looked at the cracked cement and didn't say anything. Thursday, Victoria said. Thursday, he confirmed. She hung up. He sat in the truck for another 4 minutes before he started the engine and backed out of the driveway. His hands were steady. His face was calm. Inside, he was not shaking exactly. More like the moment after a long cold when you step into warmth and your whole nervous system recalibrates at once. Everything in him that had been braced for a long time was suddenly trying to remember how to not be braced. He drove to the garden supply warehouse. He loaded inventory for 6 hours. He came home, made dinner, helped Lily with a math worksheet that involved fractions, and read her 2 chapters of the new book she'd brought home from the library. He did not tell her about the phone call. Not yet. He needed to know what it was before he let Lily see it. He had learned that lesson, the hard way learned it, in the early weeks after Viridian, when he had let himself believe twice that something was going to get better, and had seen the hope of it reflected in Lily's face, and then had to watch it disappear. He would not do that to her again unless he was sure. He would be sure first, then he would tell her everything. On Thursday at 9 a.m., a woman named Patricia Lowe called him. She identified herself as the head of Mitchell Global's internal legal team and spoke with the precise efficiency of someone who measured sentences the way other people measured materials. Nothing wasted, everything load-bearing. She explained the review process, what it required of him, what his rights were, what the timeline looked like, what best case and realistic case and worst case meant in concrete terms. She did not sugarcoat. He appreciated that more than she probably knew. He sent her the files that afternoon. All of them. 7 reports, 16 supporting emails, 2 internal memos he'd been copied on, the record of the meeting with Richard Hale that he'd written up for himself the same evening it happened, and a personal log he'd kept on paper old habit. His father's habit, the kind of man who wrote things down with a pen. Because paper couldn't be remotely deleted that covered the last 3 months of his time, at Viridian in specific, dated detail. Patricia Lowe called back 2 hours after receiving them. Her voice was still precise. But there was something underneath the precision that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Carter," she said, "I need to ask you, and I want you to understand, this is not a challenge to your credibility. It's a procedural question. Are these documents complete? Is this everything?" "That's everything I have," he said. "These emails," she said. "The March 14th report. The one that specifically references load-bearing capacity thresholds in Section D of the Harris Creek Blueprint. What about it?" The investigation file that was submitted to OSHA cites that section as having no flagged concerns prior to the incident. It presents a clean inspection record for that section. "I know," Daniel said. "I read the OSHA report when it was released. That's when I knew for certain what had happened. You knew they'd altered the record. I knew they'd removed mine from it. There's a difference between altering and omitting, but the result is the same." Silence. "Then, Mr. Carter, the March 14th email you sent was received by 3 addresses, as you said. What you may not know is that one of those addresses the Regional Safety Director's account auto-forwarded to a backup archive server." A pause that felt deliberate. A backup archive server that Richard Hale's team apparently did not know existed when they were managing the document cleanup. Daniel went very still. "The emails are in the archive," he said. "The emails are in the archive," Patricia confirmed. "Your emails, with metadata intact. Received, opened, flagged for review by the regional director, and then removed from the active system 6 days after the rack failure." He closed his eyes. 6 days after the rack failure. While 2 men were still recovering from injuries. While Daniel was sitting at home, wondering how to explain to Lily why he wasn't going to work anymore. Someone with access to the system had been in there, cleaning. "Richard," Daniel said. "We don't know that yet," Patricia said. "The access logs show the deletions came from an executive-level credential. Identifying whose credential will be part of the review." A pause. "But I want you to understand what we're looking at, Mr. Carter. This is not he said, she said anymore. This is documented evidence of document manipulation after a workplace injury. That is not a personnel matter. That is potentially criminal." Daniel breathed. "Okay," he said. "There's one more thing," Patricia said. "Victoria has requested that she be briefed directly on all findings. She's made this a personal priority. A beat. She also wants to know if you'd be willing to meet with her. Not formally, not through the review process. Just she'd like to talk to you. This week, if possible." Daniel thought about this. "Where?" She said, "Wherever you're comfortable. She'll come to you if that helps." He thought of his kitchen, with the stack of bills on the counter. He thought of his $11, had replenished slightly, but not in any way that would survive a billionaire's scrutiny of the environment. Then he stopped thinking about that, because it was exactly the kind of thinking he needed to stop doing. "There's a coffee shop on Henderson Street," he said. "In Fulton Heights. It's a small place." "I'll let her know," Patricia said. They met on Saturday morning. Lily was at a school friend's house, which solved the problem of him having to explain anything before he understood it himself. He got there 12 minutes early and ordered a coffee and sat in a corner booth and thought about how strange it was that the entire trajectory of whatever was about to happen had started with a cold child outside a diner and $11 and his daughter giving away her jacket. Victoria Mitchell walked in 3 minutes early. She was in a different version of the same composure as Thursday night, less formal, same quality. No driver this time. She ordered a coffee at the counter, paid for it herself, and carried it to the table with the practiced ease of someone who had spent enough time in boardrooms to be comfortable in any room. She sat down and looked at him and said, "You actually came. Did you think I wouldn't?" "I wasn't sure," she said. "Most people, when they find out I own the company that fired them, either want to fight immediately, or they disappear entirely. You didn't do either. I'm tired of fighting things that aren't the actual fight, Daniel said. And I don't have anything to disappear from. She looked at him for a moment. Patricia briefed you. She did. Then you know about the archive server. I do. Victoria wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I want to tell you something that is not in any document Patricia showed you, she said. Something I've been thinking about since Thursday. He waited. Harris Creek, she said, the expansion project. I was shown a progress summary at the time, a general overview, no specific safety flags. It was presented as a clean project ahead of schedule. She paused. When Richard runs a project, his summaries are always clean. I should have asked more questions. She set the cup down. I didn't. You didn't know, Daniel said. I should have known, she said flatly. That's what I'm telling you. Not asking for absolution. Telling you that I understand my role in a system that allowed this to happen. She met his eyes directly. 2 workers were hurt. You lost your career. Your daughter lost 2 years of her father being fully present. Those are real costs, and they happened in a company I own. Daniel was quiet. I'm not good at this, Victoria said. At saying things that are personal. I'm much better at decisive action. But Sophie told me what you said to her before we left. About nobody being invisible. She paused. You were invisible for 8 months, Mr. Carter. Because my company made you invisible. And I need to say that plainly before we talk about anything else. He looked at the coffee cup. He thought about the granola bar at 2 o'clock. He thought about the 2 job interviews where the room had gone cold. He thought about the log he'd kept by hand in a spiral notebook. Night after night, writing down dates and times and details. Because something in him had refused to let the story be rewritten without his own record existing somewhere. I appreciate that, he said, and meant it. Good. Victoria's posture shifted slightly, not much, but enough. Like a gear engaging. Now I want to talk about Richard Hale. Okay, Daniel said. He's been with my organization for 11 years. He built the logistics division. Half the board owes him something: introductions, deals, the particular kind of favor that accumulates when you've been in a room long enough. She said this without emotion, cataloging. He is going to fight this review. He is going to characterize it as me being manipulated by a personal connection into attacking a loyal executive. He is going to suggest that the archive server discovery is coincidental and that your documentation, while genuine, reflects a disgruntled employee's selective memory of events. I know, Daniel said. I know exactly how he'll do it. I've watched him do it already. Victoria looked at him. You have? When he called me in to tell me I was being terminated, he was very calm, very generous. He told me he understood how frustrating it must be to feel like my concerns hadn't been heard, and that sometimes passionate employees can inadvertently create the very problems they're trying to prevent. Daniel kept his voice level. He said it like he was doing me a favor, like he was the one protecting me from the truth about myself. Victoria's jaw tightened, slight, but there. That's how he operates, she said. Yes. Daniel set his cup down. So I know what the review is going to feel like. I've already stood in front of the version of this where he controls the room. He paused. The difference now is that you control the room. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. I need you to trust that, she said. I need you to trust that when Richard pushes back, and he will push back hard, I will not be moved by it. I want to be clear about that now, before this gets difficult. Because it will get difficult. I trust the documentation, Daniel said. The rest follows from that. She almost smiled. Not quite. You're a very specific kind of person, Mr. Carter. I've been told that. By who? My wife mostly. She meant it kindly. He paused. Richard Hale also said it. He meant it differently. This time she did smile. Small and brief but real. How's Lily? She asked. Good. She's at a friend's house this morning. He paused. She asks about Sophie. Something warm moved through Victoria's expression. Sophie talks about Lily every day. She wore that jacket to school twice before I noticed it wasn't hers and asked where it came from. She paused. When I told Sophie we'd found some things in the company files that things might get better for you, she sat very quietly for a moment and then said, Good. Lily's dad is a good dad. He should have a good job. Daniel said nothing. He looked at the table. She's right, Victoria said quietly. He looked up. Yeah, he said. Well, that was all he said. But the thing that had been tight in his chest for 8 months, the coiled, braced, don't let show thing shifted. Not broke, not disappeared, just loosened by 1 degree. The way a knot loosens when someone finally finds the right thread. They talked for another 40 minutes. Victoria walked him through the structure of the review, the specific evidence Patricia's team was focused on, the timeline for confronting Richard and the board. She was precise and thorough, and treated him as an equal in the conversation, not a victim being handled, not a sympathetic case to be managed, but a man who had information and judgment and standing. He wasn't used to being treated that way by anyone connected to the situation. He hadn't realized, until that morning, how much the months of being talked around and explained about and dismissed had cost him, not just in practical terms, but in something quieter and harder to name. When they stood to leave, Victoria said, "One more thing. The 2 workers from Harris Creek, the ones who were injured. I've been trying to locate them through a courier. I want to make sure they've been taken care of. Do you know anything about them?" Daniel hesitated. "I know one of them, Marcus Webb. He was a line operator. I knew him a little, we'd talk sometimes. I heard he's still in the area. His shoulder didn't heal right." Victoria nodded slowly. "I'd like to talk to him, if he's willing." "I can ask," Daniel said. "If he'll hear it from me, he might. He didn't always trust the company." "That's reasonable," she said. "Given the company." She pulled on her coat and picked up her cup. Then she stopped. "Daniel," she said, first name. Deliberate, like a shift in register. "I want to say one thing that is completely off the professional record." He waited. "What you did Thursday night at that diner, it was not a small thing. I know you think it was ordinary. I know you think any decent person would have done it." She looked at him steadily. "But I have been in rooms my entire adult life with people who have far more than you had that night. And I can tell you without equivocation that most of them would have walked past that planter box and told themselves it wasn't their problem." She paused. "You didn't. And neither did your daughter." Daniel picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Lily's mother raised her for 7 years, he said. I just try not to undo it." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I think you do more than that," she said. She walked out first. He left 2 minutes later, standing in the cold air of the Saturday morning street, and he thought about the archive server with his emails in it. He thought about Richard Hale, who had smiled at him across a desk and rearranged the truth with the same ease. Other men shuffled playing cards. He thought about Patricia Lowe saying, potentially criminal in that precise, careful voice. He thought about Marcus Webb's shoulder. He pulled out his phone and sent Marcus a text, short, careful. No promises he couldn't back yet. "Hey, can we talk? Something's happening. I think it might matter to you too." He walked to his truck. He sat in it for a moment, both hands on the wheel, in the same position he had been in 8 months ago, when the world had come down around his professional life, and 6 months before that, when it had come down around everything else. The difference was this: he was not braced anymore. Something had shifted in the structure of the thing. He couldn't see the shape of it yet. He didn't know where the review would land, what Richard would do, whether the board would fight it or fold. That's all it's. I dare you. He didn't know whether the archive server would be enough, or whether there was more buried somewhere in the system, or whether the 2 workers would come forward, or whether any of it would end the way it should. But he was not alone in it anymore, and that specific particular thing was different from anything that had been true for a very long time. His phone buzzed. "Marcus Webb, I'm listening." Daniel started the truck. He had calls to make. Marcus Webb lived in a duplex on the east side of Fulton Heights, 12 minutes from Daniel's house. Close enough that Daniel had driven past the street 100 times without ever stopping. He pulled up on a Tuesday morning, 10 days after the text exchange, because Marcus had taken that long to agree to meet in person. Not because he was hostile, because he was afraid. Daniel understood the difference. Marcus answered the door in a gray sweatshirt, with the sleeve pushed up on his left arm, the one that had been crushed under the collapsed rack at Harris Creek. The arm looked normal from the outside. Marcus moved it with the careful, deliberate economy of a man who had made peace with a thing that still cost him something every day. "Daniel," he said, not warmly, not coldly, just the name, like he was confirming an identity. "Marcus." Daniel nodded at the arm without pointing at it. How's it doing? Marcus looked down at it. 70%, the doctor says, which means I can lift about 60 pounds on a good day. He stepped back from the door. Come in. The inside of Marcus's place was clean and sparse. A couch, a television, a folding table near the window with papers on it, bills. Daniel recognized the specific arrangement of a man managing things carefully. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet, was a drawing in crayon. A stick-figure man with a big smile and the word "Day" underneath in uneven letters. Marcus caught him looking. My daughter, he said. She's 5. She thinks my arm is just tired. I let her think that. Daniel sat down at the folding table, because Marcus gestured at it. Marcus sat across from him and put both hands flat on the surface and looked at Daniel the way a man looks at something he's not sure he trusts yet. You said something's happening, Marcus said. It is. Daniel kept it simple, clean, no dramatics. Victoria Mitchell is opening an internal review of what happened at Harris Creek. The document manipulation, the altered inspection records. He paused. My reports were in an archive server. The ones they said didn't exist. They exist. Marcus didn't say anything. He looked at his hands on the table. The access logs show someone deleted them. 6 days after the accident, Daniel continued. While you were still in the hospital. Marcus's jaw shifted. He breathed through his nose once, slowly. They were cleaning up, he said. It wasn't a question, yes. Marcus was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the refrigerator kicked on and hummed, and the crayon drawing on it trembled slightly in the air movement. I tried to file a complaint, Marcus said after. When I was still in the hospital. He said it flatly, without drama, the way you state a thing that you have processed so many times it no longer has the power to surprise you. HR came to see me, a woman with a tablet and a very good suit. She was very kind. She explained that the rack failure was being investigated and that my medical costs would be covered, and that there was a settlement offer being prepared. He looked up. She was there for 2 hours. The whole time she was very kind, and she never once asked me what I saw, what I knew, what I'd heard people saying before the expansion went live. Daniel said. Because she wasn't there to find out what you knew. No, Marcus said. She was there to make sure I understood what the settlement required. He paused. Non-disclosure. I couldn't talk about the conditions that led to the accident. My medical costs, lost wages, and $50,000 in exchange for my silence about Harris Creek, he said the number, flatly, like it was a dollar amount he'd looked at from every angle until the angles stopped mattering. I have a 5-year-old and a shoulder that works at 70%. I took the deal. The room was quiet. I'm not judging that, Daniel said. I know you're not. Marcus looked at him. But you need to know it. You need to know I signed something. I know. Victoria's legal team knows. They're looking at whether the settlement agreement is enforceable, given that it was signed while the company was actively concealing the evidence that would have informed your decision. Daniel paused. Patricia Lowe says that changes the legal landscape considerably. Marcus absorbed this. He sat back in his chair slowly. Who else knows, right now? Victoria and her legal team. You as of this morning, he paused. There was a second worker. Tom Reardon. He was a contractor. Do you know what happened to him? Marcus nodded. He moved back to Oklahoma after. He's working for his brother's construction company. I have his number. Will he talk? Marcus thought about it. Tom was angrier than me, he said. He didn't take a settlement because they offered him less. Said it was insulting. Walked out of the room, a pause. Which means he didn't sign anything. Daniel felt something shift in the room. Small and significant. The way a key feels when it's found the right tumbler. That's important, Daniel said. Yeah, Marcus said. He was looking at the crayon drawing again. It is. They sat for another hour. Marcus talked. Not performed for an audience, not constructed for effect, but talked the way a man talks when he's been holding something in a closed room inside himself for almost a year, and someone finally opens the door. He talked about what he had heard in the weeks before the Harris Creek accident supervisors being told to push through the installation timeline, the fire suppression contractor asking for more time and being denied, the load capacity stickers on the racks being covered with tape rather than replaced with correctly rated ones, because the correct ones hadn't arrived and they were behind schedule and the racks looked fine. He talked about the morning it happened. How the sound of the lock collapse was not the sharp crack he would have expected, but a low, grinding shriek, the sound of metal being asked to do something it was never built to do. How he had been under the third rack pulling inventory when it started to give. How he had moved fast, but not fast enough, and the corner caught his shoulder and drove him into the concrete floor, with the weight of a full shelf of industrial supply crates behind it. He talked about lying on the floor and looking at the ceiling, and thinking about his daughter, who was 2 at the time, and whose face he could see precisely in those seconds, more clearly than he had ever seen anything. He talked about all of this in a steady, quiet voice, and when he was finished, the room was very still. "I'll talk to the review," Marcus said. "If it doesn't violate the settlement, I'll tell them everything I'm telling you." He paused. "And I'll call Tom." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." Marcus looked at him directly. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Richard Hale didn't get where he is by making it easy to go against him. That man has been in this industry for 20 years. He knows where all the doors are and he owns most of the locks." He paused. "You're not going to like what he does when he finds out the review is happening." "I know," Daniel said. "Do you?" Marcus studied him. "Because knowing it and being ready for it are different things. I was not ready." Daniel thought about Richard Hale's office. The flat hands on the desk. The smile that never reached the eyes. The way he had said ambitious employees, with exactly the same tone you would use for contaminated water, something to be removed before it caused a problem. "I've been ready for 8 months, Daniel said. "I just didn't have the room to fight in." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he exhaled and pushed back from the table. "Okay," he said. "Tell me what you need." What Daniel needed turned out to be more than he'd expected and arrived faster than he'd prepared for. By Thursday of that same week, Patricia Lowe called to tell him the review had been formally opened. Richard Hale had been notified that morning. The call came at 8:14 a.m. By 8:47 a.m., Richard Hale's personal attorney had contacted Mitchell Global's legal team. By 9:30 a.m., the attorney had sent a letter characterizing the review as a hostile action against a long-serving executive, driven by a personal relationship between Victoria Mitchell and a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. "That was fast," Daniel said. "He's been in this business a long time," Patricia said, with the dry precision of someone who was not surprised and did not plan to be. He was ready. "What does it mean for the review?" "It means it gets louder and it gets uglier before it gets better," she said. "It also means he's scared. Innocent people don't lawyer up in 33 minutes. Richard Hale's attorney sent a second letter that afternoon. This one was addressed to Daniel personally, delivered via email to his personal account, which meant someone in Richard's network had accessed information they had no business accessing. The letter was 5 paragraphs of precisely calibrated legal language that translated. In plain terms, too, "You are making a serious mistake. We know who you are and what you need, and we are prepared to make this very difficult for you." Daniel read it 3 times. Then he forwarded it to Patricia. She called back in 11 minutes. "Do not respond," she said. "Do not acknowledge it. Do not discuss it with anyone outside this team." A pause. "And save everything. We're now also looking at potential harassment," Daniel said. He went to my personal email. "That address isn't connected to anything public." Silence for 2 beats. "I know," Patricia said. "We noticed." That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table after Lily was asleep and put both hands flat on the surface the same way Marcus had. And he thought about the shape of the thing he was in the middle of. He had spent 8 months thinking about this as something clear and simple. The documents existed. The truth was documented. And therefore, at some point, the truth would reassert itself. Because that was how he had been raised to believe the world worked. He was no longer that naive. He understood now that the truth was not self-executing. The truth required someone with more power than the people who were suppressing it to pick it up and carry it into the room. Victoria Mitchell was that person, and Richard Hale knew it. And Richard Hale was going to do everything in his power to discredit, delay, and dismantle the review before it could reach a conclusion. The question and Daniel could not stop turning over, was whether Victoria would hold. He knew what she'd said in the coffee shop. He knew what she'd told him about not being moved. But he also knew so that she had known Richard Hale for 11 years, and that the board members who owed Richard favors had existed in her professional life for that entire time, and that the distance between "I will not be moved" said over coffee on a Saturday morning and "I will not be moved." Standing in a boardroom, being told that she was destroying a loyal executive's career over a personal grudge. That distance was real, and he had no way of knowing whether it was crossable until she tried to cross it. He didn't sleep well. He was at the garden supply warehouse loading inventory at 7 a. the next day because the work was still there, and the bills were still there, and the fact that something significant was happening in a legal process he had no direct control over did not change the math on the kitchen counter. His phone buzzed at 9:18 a.m. Victoria. He stepped outside to take it. "Richard called me," she said. "He stopped moving." "When?" "Last night. At home. On my personal line." Her voice was level, but there was something underneath it, not fear, but the thing that lives next to anger when anger has been refined into something precise and purposeful. "He called to tell me he was worried about me, that I was being manipulated, that my grief over Sophie's situation was causing me to make an emotional decision that would have serious professional consequences." She paused. He was very kind about it. Daniel felt something cold move through him. "He called you about Sophie?" "Yes, he knows about Thursday night. About Sophie being at the diner." "Someone talked," Victoria said. "It doesn't matter who. What matters is that he's trying to frame this as a personal emotional decision rather than an organizational accountability issue." A pause, which means he's starting to understand what the archive server means. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked. A brief silence, like the question surprised her. "I'm angry," she said, which is clarifying. She said it like anger was a tool she trusted, like she had used it before. "I'm calling to tell you that the board is being briefed today. Patricia will present the preliminary findings. Richard will have representation in the room." Another pause. "I want you to be available by phone between 2 and 4 this afternoon. I may need to reach you quickly." "I'll be here," he said. "Daniel." She said it the same way she had at the coffee shop, first name, deliberate. "I need you to know something." He waited. "Richard told me that if I proceed with this review, he will take it public. His version of it. He has contacts in business media and he will use them." She paused. "That means your name will be in it. Your history with Viridian. The version of the story where you are the disgruntled former employee who found a billionaire with a guilty conscience and used her to settle a personal score." Daniel breathed, slow and deliberate. "I know, it will be unpleasant. I know. Most people would stop here," she said. "Not as a challenge, as a statement of fact." "I know that too," he said. "I'm not most people." Another brief silence. Then "No. You're not," she exhaled. 2 to 4, be available." He hung up. He went back inside and finished loading inventory and thought about his daughter, who was in school right now, learning multiplication tables and building something out of cardboard in art and entirely unaware that her father's name was possibly about to appear in a business news story that would describe him as a manipulator and an opportunist. He thought about that for 3 hours. At 1:47 p.m., Patricia Lowe texted him, "Board meeting underway. Findings presented. Richard's attorney is present." It's heated. At 2:23 p.m., Richard is claiming the archive server evidence was planted. His attorney is suggesting the metadata was altered. Daniel stared at that one. He read it 3 times. Then he called Patricia. "Can they prove that?" he asked. "That the metadata was altered?" "No," she said, "because it wasn't. We had an independent forensic analyst review it yesterday, specifically in anticipation of this argument. The metadata is clean and consistent with the original send dates." A pause. "But the claim buys him time. It creates doubt in the room. 3 board members are asking for an independent technical review before proceeding. How long does that take? If they fast-track it, 2 weeks. If they don't, 6 weeks. 6 more weeks of the bills in the garden supply warehouse, and the official record sitting on his name like a stone." "Victoria?" he asked. "She's holding," Patricia said. "She called for the fast-track option, and she has enough board votes to enforce it." A pause. "But Daniel, I need to warn you. Richard's attorney said something in the room this morning. About Lily." He went completely still. "What about Lily?" He suggested that Victoria's decision-making may have been compromised by an emotional attachment to, and I'm quoting, a sympathetic single-parent narrative. He didn't name Lily specifically, but the implication was clear. Patricia's voice was careful. I want you to know that we are watching for anything that crosses into harassment territory. But I also want you to be prepared for the possibility that someone with Richard's resources may try to find pressure points. If there is anything in your personal life that you think could be used. There's nothing, Daniel said. My life for the past 2 years has been working and raising my daughter and trying to put the pieces back together. There is nothing. He paused. But I appreciate the warning. He hung up and sat in his truck in the parking lot of the Garden Supply warehouse and let himself feel for exactly 60 seconds. The full weight of it, the unfairness of it, the specific, grinding unfairness of being a man who had done everything right and documented everything and told the truth and been punished for it. And now, having finally found someone with enough power to expose the lie, facing the possibility that the lie would be resourced and weaponized and turned back on him again. He felt it, all of it. He gave it its 60 seconds. Then he started the truck. He picked Lily up from school. He made dinner. He helped her with her homework. He listened to her tell him, in enormous detail, about a disagreement she'd had at recess with a boy named Cade, who claimed that dolphins were not smarter than dogs, which Lily considered both factually incorrect and personally offensive. What did you say? Daniel asked. I said the fact that dolphins have names for each other means they're at least as smart as people who argue about it at recess. He looked at her. That's actually a very good argument. I know, Lily said with satisfaction. He put her to bed at 8:30. He washed the dishes. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the stack of bills and the card from Victoria Mitchell still there. Moved to the side of the stack, and he thought about Marcus Webb's 70% shoulder and Tom Reardon in Oklahoma, and 2 workers who had been hurt in a warehouse that his reports might have protected if anyone had listened. He thought about the settlement offer, and the woman with the tablet, and the non-disclosure agreement, and $50,000 in exchange for silence while the cleaning happened in the system. He called Marcus at 9 p.m. The board meeting was today, he said. Richard is claiming the evidence was planted. Marcus was quiet for a second. Of course he is. It won't hold. The forensics are clean. But it buys him time and creates noise. Daniel paused. Did you reach Tom? Yesterday, Marcus said. He'll talk. He's angry, Daniel. He's been angry for a year and nobody's asked him about it until now. A pause. He said. He'll make a formal statement. He wants it on the record. Something in Daniel's chest eased by 1 more degree. Good, he said. Tell him to call Patricia Lowe. Already did, Marcus said. She called him this morning, a beat. She moves fast. She does, Daniel agreed. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then my wife asked me last night why I'm doing this. Why I'm risking the settlement over something that already happened. He paused. I told her because if I don't, the next guy on that floor is going to have the same conversation with his family that I'm having now, just with different names. He stopped. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, okay, then do it right. Daniel was quiet for a moment. She sounds like a good woman, he said. She is, Marcus said. You had a good woman too, from what I remember. The best, Daniel said. Simply, without performance. They were quiet together on the line for a second. 2 men who understood certain losses from the inside, and the quietness was its own kind of communication. Get some sleep, Marcus said. You too. He didn't sleep much. He was at the warehouse at 7 again. He moved boxes and checked manifests and did the physical work of surviving while the legal and organizational machinery ground through its process somewhere above him in a world of conference rooms and briefing. Documents and motions he couldn't directly affect. At 11:14 on a Friday morning, 17 days after the review formally opened, his phone rang. Victoria. He stepped away from the loading dock. The forensic review is complete, she said. 2 days ahead of schedule, he waited. The metadata is verified clean, she said. The archive server contents are confirmed authentic. The deletion access logs have been traced. She paused, and in the pause was the weight of something that had been building for a very long time. The executive credential used to delete your reports from the active system belongs to Richard Hale. Not a proxy, not an assistant, his personal login. At 11:47 p.m., 6 days after the Harris Creek accident, Daniel put his hand flat against the wall of the warehouse. He did it himself, Daniel said. He did it himself, Victoria confirmed. 11:47 at night, from a company server, with his own credentials. A pause. He either didn't know about the backup archive server, or he thought it had been wiped. It hadn't been. Another pause. Patricia is preparing the formal findings for the full board presentation next Wednesday. I want you there. He pushed off the wall. In the room? In the building, she said. In a room adjacent. I may need to call you in as a witness. I may not need to, but I want you there. A pause. Are you available? I'll be there, he said. There's one more thing, Victoria said. The quality of her voice shifted, still composed, but something underneath it that was not quite composure. Something more personal. Richard called me again last night. She stopped, started again. He told me that if I present these findings to the full board, he will make sure that a very specific story reaches the media. About Sophie, about the night at the diner. He has a version of it that suggests I engineered the situation, that I used Sophie to manufacture a connection with you, to create cover for a vendetta against him. Daniel felt something cold and sharp move through him. He would drag Sophie into this. He said her name, Victoria said. He said, my daughter's name as a bargaining chip. Her voice was still controlled, but beneath it was something with edges. I want you to know that, because I want you to understand the exact kind of man we are dealing with. And I want you to understand that after he said her name, I told him to expect the full findings at the Wednesday board meeting, and I ended the call. The silence stretched. Victoria, Daniel said. Yes. Are you okay? The same question he'd asked before. The same brief silence before the answer. I will be, she said. After Wednesday, he stood at the loading dock of the garden supply warehouse with the phone in his hand and the cold November air on his face, and he thought about a man who had deleted safety reports at midnight, 6 days after 2 workers were injured. He thought about the specific calculation of that, the timing of it, the deliberateness of it, the fact that Richard Hale had sat somewhere at 11:47 p.m. with the evidence of his own choices in front of him and had made the decision to erase it. Not because he didn't know it was wrong. Because he knew exactly what he had done and wanted no one else to know it. That was the part that mattered. Not the cover-up, not the manipulation, not the careful reframing of Daniel's 7 reports as obstruction. The part that mattered was that Richard Hale had known. He had read those reports. He had understood the risk. He had made the choice to proceed anyway. And when the rack came down and Marcus Webb's shoulder was destroyed, and a man lay on a concrete floor, thinking about his 2-year-old daughter's face, Richard Hale's response had been to go into the system at midnight and make the documentation of his own knowledge disappear. Daniel had thought, for 8 months, that the injustice was personal, that he had been wronged, and that was the central fact of the situation. He understood now that the central fact was different. The central fact was 2 workers on a floor that didn't have to give way. The central fact was Marcus's 70% shoulder. The central fact was a 5-year-old's crayon drawing on a refrigerator, DAD, in uneven letters attached to a man who moved through his days with careful, deliberate economy because his body had been changed by a decision someone else made and covered up before anyone could challenge it. Daniel Carter had spent 8 months trying to get his name back. What he understood on a Friday morning outside a garden supply warehouse, phone still in hand, was that his name was almost the least important part of this. He went back inside and finished the shift. On Wednesday morning, he put on the same jacket he'd worn to the 2 failed job interviews, the one that still looked respectable, the one he kept for occasions that required him to look like a man who had not been snappily ground down, and he drove 45 minutes to the Mitchell Global Industries building in Austin. Patricia Lowe met him in the lobby. She was smaller than he'd imagined from the phone calls, compact, efficient, the kind of person whose physicality matched her voice exactly. She shook his hand with the grip of someone who wanted you to know immediately that she was not here to waste time. The board is assembled, she said, walking fast. Richard is in the room with his attorney. Victoria will present the findings. If it goes where I think it goes, she'll call for a vote on his removal." She paused without slowing down. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for 8 months, Daniel said. She glanced at him sideways. "People say that. I documented it," he said. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. "Room 4B, she said. "I'll come get you if we need you." He sat in room 4B, which had a window, a table, 2 chairs, and a carafe of coffee that he poured himself a cup from, and then didn't drink. He sat, and he listened to the muffled sound of voices, through the wall, not words, just the rhythm and weight of them, the particular music of a room where something important was being decided. At 10:47 m, the voices went quiet. At 10:52, they got loud. At 11:06, they went quiet again. At 11:19, Patricia opened the door to room 4B. Her face was controlled and exact, and underneath the control was the particular expression of a person who has just watched something they prepared very carefully perform exactly as designed. "They want you in the room," she said. Daniel stood up. He left the coffee on the table. He straightened his jacket. He walked down the hallway toward the boardroom door, and he thought about nothing except putting one foot in front of the other, and he pushed the door open, and he walked in. Richard Hale was sitting at the far end of the table. He looked, for the first time in Daniel's experience of him, like a man who was aware that the room was not his anymore. The attorney beside him had a hand on Richard's forearm in the way attorneys do when they're managing someone who might say the wrong thing. Victoria stood at the head of the table. She looked at Daniel when he walked in, and the look she gave him was clear and direct and carried something in it. That was not quite relief, but was the thing that lives near relief, the expression of a person who has been waiting for the right moment and has finally arrived at it. "Mr. Carter," she said, "thank you for coming." She gestured to a chair. He sat. Richard Hale looked at him across the length of the table, and for one moment, one brief, unguarded moment, the composure dropped. Not entirely, just enough. Just enough for Daniel to see, underneath it, the particular expression of a man who had told himself for 8 months that the person he had erased would stay erased. Daniel looked back at him steadily, with the patience of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment for a very long time, and said nothing. He didn't need to say anything. He was in the room. That was enough. The boardroom had 11 people in it when Daniel walked through the door, and every single one of them looked at him the moment he entered. He had expected that. What he had not expected was the specific quality of the silence, not hostile, not welcoming, but the particular silence of a room that had just been cracked open, deciding what the air felt like on the other side. He took the chair Victoria had indicated, and he sat with his back straight and his hands on the table, and he looked at no one in particular, which meant he was looking at everything. The table was long and dark and expensive. There were 11 chairs around it, 9 of them occupied by board members, whose names he knew from Patricia's briefing documents, faces to names, histories attached. The specific landscape of a room where power was distributed unevenly, but not invisibly. At the far end, Richard Hale sat with his attorney, whose name was Gerald Marsh, and Gerald Marsh had the face of a man specifically to look unimpressed by whatever he encountered. It was a practiced face. Daniel recognized practiced faces. Victoria stood at the head of the table, and she had the floor, and the way she held it was not aggressive but was absolute. She nodded at Daniel, once confirmation. Not welcome, the nod of a general acknowledging a necessary piece of the field, and then she looked back at the room. "Mr. Carter is here at my request," she said. "He is the senior safety inspector, whose termination record is at the center of this review. He has been fully briefed on the proceedings and has cooperated fully with our legal team." She paused. "He is not here as a complainant. He is here as a witness to a pattern of conduct that this board needs to understand directly. Because the documents can tell you what happened, but the documents cannot tell you what it cost." Richard's attorney leaned forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, with respect, this is highly irregular. Mr. Carter's presence at a board proceeding is within my authority as chair," Victoria said. Not loudly, not aggressively, with the flat certainty of someone who had checked the authority before invoking it. "The irregularity, Mr. Marsh, is the conduct that made this proceeding necessary. Mr. Carter's presence is the least irregular thing in this room today." Gerald Marsh sat back, said nothing more. One of the board members, a man named Franklin Corey, who had been with the company since before Victoria's was in, and whose face carried the particular wariness of someone who had survived multiple institutional upheavals by never fully committing to any of them, spoke up from the middle of the table. "Ms. Mitchell," Corey said, "I think I speak for several of us when I say that the evidence your team has presented this morning is significant. The access logs are concerning. The archive server findings are concerning." He paused. "But I want to understand the full picture. Before this board takes action, I'd like to hear directly from Mr. Hale." "Of course," Victoria said. She gestured down the table. "Richard." The room turned toward Richard Hale. It was the first time Daniel had been in the same room with the man since the termination meeting. He had thought, in the months since, that seeing Richard again would produce something explosive in him: rage, or grief, or the particular sick electricity of confronting someone who had taken something from you and lied about taking it. He had braced for that without realizing he was bracing. What he felt instead was very quiet, a kind of specific clarity, like the moment after you take a photograph, and the flash goes that half-second when everything is suddenly, startlingly lit. Richard Hale looked like himself. That was the thing. He looked exactly like himself, composed, authoritative, the practiced ease of a man who had been the most powerful person in most rooms for most of his professional life. He straightened slightly in his chair. He set his hands on the table in the same flat, deliberate way Daniel remembered from the termination meeting, like a man arranging arguments. "I appreciate the opportunity to address the board directly," Richard said. His voice was measured and calm. "What I've heard presented this morning is deeply troubling to me. Not because the evidence is accurate, but because it represents a significant departure from how this organization conducts itself. Specifically, I'm troubled by the decision to open a formal review based on the allegations of a former employee without first conducting a thorough verification of whether those allegations were. The forensic verification was independent," Patricia said from her position beside Victoria. "Draw edge in it. Just fact. Two external firms, engaged separately. Neither of them knew the other was reviewing the same evidence." Richard's eyes moved to Patricia briefly, then back to the room. "I understand that. My concern is with the underlying methodology, Richard." Victoria's voice was quiet, almost gentle, the kind of quiet that is quieter than shouting. "Tell the board about the 1147 deletion." The room went still. Richard's attorney put a hand on his forearm. Richard didn't look at the hand. He kept his eyes on Victoria. "The access logs," Victoria continued. "The same quiet. Show your personal login credentials were used to delete files from the active system at 11:47 p.m., 6 days after the Harris Creek accident. That is a fact established by two independent forensic reviewers. I'm asking you to explain it to this board." Richard was quiet for 3 seconds. Daniel counted them. "I would like to consult with my attorney before responding to that specific question," Richard said. It was the right legal answer. It was also the answer of a man who did not have another answer. The quality of the silence in the room changed again. Daniel felt it shift the specific moment when a room full of people who have been carefully withholding judgment stops withholding it. Franklin Corey looked down at the table. Two of the other board members exchanged a glance that lasted less than a second, but contained a conversation. Victoria looked at Richard for one long moment. Then she turned to the room. "I'd like to call Mr. Carter to speak," she said. Daniel had not been told he would be asked to speak. Patricia had said he might be called as a witness, but witness to her meant answering questions, not standing up in front of a board. He looked at Victoria, and she looked back at him with an expression that said, "I know. I'm asking anyway. This is the moment." He stood up. He had no notes. He had thought about this possibility in the abstract. In the same way you think about something, you can't fully prepare for present to it, but not rehearsed. He stood at the table, not at the head of it, just at his chair, and he looked at the room. "My name is Daniel Carter," he said. 8 months ago, I was the senior safety inspector for Viridian Logistics. I filed 7 safety reports over 14 weeks, documenting specific, concrete hazards in the Harris Creek expansion project. Every report was time-stamped, Every report was received. Every report was read by the people I sent it to. He paused. After a rack failure, injured 2 workers whose names are in those reports. Workers I was trying to protect. I was terminated for failure to properly document inspection protocols. The official record said I hadn't done my job. He stopped, breathed. I did my job, he said. I did my job completely accurately and with full documentation. The documentation was deleted from the active system after the accident. My career was ended to protect the people responsible for that decision. He looked down the length of the table to Richard Hale. I know who made that decision. The forensic record knows who made that decision. And now this board knows who made that decision. He sat down. The room was completely quiet. Richard's attorney was writing something on a notepad. Richard himself was looking at the far wall, and his face had undergone a change that was subtle enough that someone who hadn't been watching him closely might have missed it. But Daniel had been watching him closely, and what he saw was the specific expression of a man whose primary architecture had just sustained damage. Not collapse, not surrender, but damage. The kind that changes the load distribution of everything above it. Franklin Corey cleared his throat. I'd like to call for a recess, he said. 30 minutes, Victoria agreed. People filed out. Daniel stayed in his chair. Patricia sat down beside him and didn't say anything for a moment. You didn't rehearse that, she said. No, it showed. In a good way, she paused. Rehearsed things sound like arguments. That sounded like facts. It is, said. Yes, Patricia said. That's why it worked. During the recess, Daniel stepped into the hallway and called Marcus Webb. It was 11:34 a.m. Marcus answered on the second ring. How is it? Marcus asked. No preamble. He invoked attorney privilege on the 11:47 question, Daniel said. Marcus was quiet for a second. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Of course he did. The board is in recess. I think they're talking to each other right now. Corey looked uncomfortable. Corey's been Richard's man for years, Marcus said. If he's uncomfortable, the ground is moving. A pause. Tom submitted his statement this morning. Did Patricia tell you? No, he sent it last night. Written and signed 4 pages. Marcus paused. He wrote about the rack stickers, Daniel. The covered capacity ratings. He saw it happen. He can put a name to the supervisor who did it. Daniel leaned against the hallway wall and closed his eyes for a second. The covered capacity ratings. Not just the deleted reports, not just the access logs, an employee who had physically watched safety ratings being taped over on racks that subsequently collapsed, a witness who had not signed a non-disclosure, a witness who was angry and had been for a year, and had done pages of it written down. Patricia needs to know, Daniel said. I told her at 8 this morning, Marcus said. She already has it in the room. He had underestimated Patricia Lowe's efficiency, which was, he was learning, a mistake. He went back inside at the 30-minute mark. The room had a different energy when it reassembled. Matis, something had happened. The small conversations and the phone calls and the weight of people who had been sitting with a difficult decision and had privately reached it. Corey's face was different. He sat down without looking at Richard's end of the table, which told Daniel something important. Victoria called the room to order at 12 p.m. She introduced Tom Reardon's statement without drama, just the facts of who Tom was, what he had witnessed, that the statement was signed, that it had been reviewed by the legal team, and that Tom was available to give testimony in any formal proceeding that followed. She set the document on the table and let it sit there and do what documents do when they contain the truth, which is to take up more space than their physical dimensions should allow. Richard's attorney requested that the statement be excluded as late submitted evidence, Patricia said. It was submitted before this proceeding opened this morning. The timing of its introduction is at our discretion. The request was denied. Richard Hale said, for the first time in 90 minutes, something that was not routed through his attorney. He said it quietly, almost to himself, but the room was quiet enough that everyone heard it. This is not what I built this organization to be, he said. It was the wrong thing to say. He knew it. The moment it left his mouth, Daniel could see him know it, see the slight recoil, the awareness of the miscalculation. Because what the sentence implied was ownership. What it said, underneath the intended meaning was, I built this. It belongs to me. The standards I applied to it are the ones that count. Victoria heard it the same way. No, she said, simply. Without heat, it isn't. And that is the point, Richard. She looked at the board. At each face, one at a time, the way a person looks at something they have decided. I'm calling for a vote on the removal of Richard Hale from his position as operations director, effective immediately, pending a full investigation to be conducted in coordination with the appropriate regulatory and legal authorities. She paused. All in favor. 7 hands, 7 out of 9. Corey's hand was among them, the last to go up, 2 seconds after the others, but up. Richard's attorney was already opening his briefcase. Richard himself sat very still. He looked at the hands around the table, counted them. Maybe, or maybe just felt the specific weight of a room that has turned, and for one moment, sitting at the far end of that expensive table, he looked like what he was. Not a powerful man, not a 20-year veteran of industry. Just a man who had made a series of choices that had led him here, and who was now in the room with the consequences of them. He looked at Daniel. Daniel looked back. He did not feel triumph. He had thought, in the abstract, that this moment would feel like triumph, like the correction of a long imbalance, the satisfying click of a thing being set right. What he felt instead was something quieter and more complicated. The relief was real, but underneath it was the weight of what it had taken to get here, 8 months of being the wrong person in the official record. 2 workers, with injuries and settlements, and signed silences, his daughter, watching his face for signs, and learning not to ask follow-up questions because she'd learned that some things were too tender to touch. It had taken all of that. The truth had been there the whole time, buried in an archive server that Richard Hale apparently had not known existed, waiting with the patience of documented facts for someone with the power to retrieve it. The vote concluded. Victoria thanked the board. People began to move. Richard Hale and Gerald Marsh left the room without looking at anyone. Victoria walked down the length of the table to where Daniel was standing. She stopped in front of him. She looked at him the same way she had in the diner, like she was reading something, weighing something. And then she extended her hand. He shook it. It's not over, she said. There will be a formal investigation. OSHA will be re-involved. There may be legal proceedings. She kept her voice even. Your participation will be required, through all of it. I know, he said. And your record, she said. I've already directed HR to initiate the formal reversal of your termination status. The performance dismissal classification is being expunged. Your professional record with Veridian will reflect the accurate history of your employment. She paused. That process will take 2 to 3 weeks to complete through the proper channels. 2 to 3 weeks, after 8 months. He did the math on that. Thank you, he said. There's one more thing, Victoria said. She glanced at Patricia briefly, then back. The company wants to offer you a position. Senior Vice President of Safety Operations. Mitchell Global, not Veridian, a new role, specifically created to establish and oversee safety compliance across all 3 subsidiaries. She paused. It was my idea. But the board approved it before the vote on Richard, because they'd already read the reports. The actual reports. What you documented. She looked at him steadily. They wanted the person who wrote those reports working on the problem that made them necessary. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about the offer. He turned it over. The title. The salary he could extrapolate from a senior vice president at a company of this size, which would be significant by any measure of his current math. Healthcare for Lily. The end of the garden supply warehouse. The end of the grocery deliveries on Friday nights. When he should have been home. He thought about what accepting it would mean. Taking a title and a salary from the company that had destroyed his career. Because they felt sorry for the way it ended. Walking into an organization where half the people would see him as the man Victoria Mitchell had brought in through a personal connection, and the other half would see him as the walking evidence of a legal liability they were trying to manage. He thought about what he had said to himself in the truck on the morning of the vote, that he had spent 8 months trying to get his name back, and that getting his name back was almost the least important part of the situation. I'm grateful, he said. I mean that. Victoria waited. But I can't take that position, he said. Patricia looked up from her notepad. Why? Victoria asked, not offended, genuinely asking. Because the title comes from this situation, he said. And the situation was a wrong being corrected. I don't want a job because someone corrected a wrong. I want a job because I'm the right person for it. And I earned it on the merits. He paused. If that job exists somewhere here or anywhere on those terms, I'll compete for it. I'll interview. I'll present my record. I'll make the case. But I won't accept it as compensation for what happened. He looked at Victoria directly. That's not the same thing as having my name back. That's just a different way of the situation defining me. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That is the most expensive answer to a job offer I have ever heard." "I know," Daniel said. "It's also," she said, "exactly what I expected you to say." She tilted her head slightly. "So here is a different offer, not a position, a contract." She paused. "Viridian and 2 of our other subsidiaries need their safety compliance systems rebuilt from the ground up. Not managed, built. New documentation frameworks, new inspection protocols, new reporting chains that bypass the kind of executive filtering that allowed what happened at Harris Creek to happen." She held his gaze. "That is a project, not a title. It has a defined scope and a defined deliverable. You would be engaged as an independent consultant, on your terms with your own professional standing." She paused. "If the project goes well, which I believe it will, there may be a permanent role on the other side of it, on the merits, as you said." Daniel was quiet. He thought about 7 reports in 14 weeks and a backup archive server that had held the truth patiently for 8 months while the world moved around it. He thought about rebuilding safety systems. Not from the position of an employee who could be managed and filtered and silenced. From the position of an independent professional whose deliverable was the integrity of the systems themselves. He thought about Marcus Webb's 70% shoulder. "Tell me what the scope looks like," he said. Victoria's mouth moved the small controlled thing that in someone else would be a full smile. "Patricia will send you the framework document tonight," she said. "Look it over. Tell me what's missing. We'll meet next week." He nodded. Next week. People were filing out of the boardroom. The room was emptying around them. Patricia closed her notepad and moved toward the door, giving them space. Victoria looked at Daniel, and for a moment she was not the chair of a billion-dollar company, not the woman who had just presided over the removal of a trusted executive. She was a person standing on the other side of something difficult, with the specific exhaustion and relief of someone who has done a hard thing and found that doing it was worth it. "Your daughter," she said. "Lily. Sophie wants to know if Lily would want to come over this weekend." They've been. Sophie talks about her constantly. The Thunderbird handshake. The cornbread rules. A pause. "I think Sophie needs a friend more than I'd admitted to myself." Daniel thought about Lily at the kitchen table, telling him about the dolphin argument with perfect confidence. He thought about Lily, holding out the jacket with both hands. Nobody should have to be cold when someone can help. "She'd love that," he said. Victoria nodded. "Saturday. I'll text you the address." He walked out of the Mitchell Global building at 12:43 p. into the November air. He stood on the sidewalk and he breathed it in the cold, the noise of the city, the ordinary ambient sound of a world going about its business, while inside that building, something had just been permanently and irreversibly changed. His phone was ringing before he reached his truck. "Marcus," he answered it. "Tell me," Marcus said. 7 votes for removal," Daniel said. "Effective immediately." Marcus was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he said, "Daniel." "Yeah." Tom cried when I told him his statement was admitted. Marcus's voice had something in it that he was managing carefully. He called his wife right after. I could hear her through the phone. A pause. He said, "He's been carrying that rack sticker image in his head for a year. Every time he went into a warehouse, every time he saw a forklift, his voice was steady now," he said. It felt like he'd finally put it down. Daniel leaned against the side of his truck. He looked at the building across the street. An ordinary building. People coming and going. "They're going to re-involve OSHA," Daniels said. "There may be formal legal proceedings. Tom and you may need to give more statements." "We know," Marcus said. "We talked about it. We're ready." "And your settlement?" "Patricia says it's unenforceable given the concealment," Marcus said. "I'm not going after anything. I've got what I need." A pause. "The shoulder is the shoulder. That doesn't change. But my kid doesn't have to grow up thinking her father took money to stay quiet about something that mattered. His voice was even. That changes. Daniel didn't say anything for a second. Get back to your family, he said finally. You get back to yours, Marcus said. He drove home. He picked Lily up from school. She came out the front doors, with her backpack bouncing and 3 folders tucked under one arm, and the expression of someone who had a lot to report. She got in the truck and buckled herself in and looked at him. She looked at him the way she always looked at him, with her mother's eyes, reading the weather. Dad, she said, yeah. Something happened. He looked at her in the rearview mirror. He thought about what to say and how to say it, and how much she would understand, and how much she already understood, without being told, because she was 9, and she was Lily, and she had been reading his face for 2 years. Something good, he said. Lily was quiet for a second. Then how good, pretty good, he said. I'll tell you about it at dinner. She processed this. Yeah, Bug, he said. I'm actually okay. She looked at him for one more second with her mother's eyes. Then she apparently decided the assessment was accurate, because she opened her folder and started telling him about the thing she was making in art class, which involved papier-mâché, and a creative interpretation of a horse that had evolved, in her description, into something that was more philosophically horse than literally horse, which she seemed to feel was an improvement. He drove home and listened to her talk, and the thing in his chest that had been coiled and braced for 8 months was loose now, genuinely loose, the way something is loose when it has actually been let go, and not just told to let go. At dinner, he told her, all of it, in the version a 9-year-old needed, not the legal mechanics, not the forensic evidence, not Richard Hale's face at the end of the table, but the essential shape of it. He told her that the people who said he'd done something wrong had been shown to be wrong, that his record was being fixed, that people who had been hurt in the same situation were going to be heard, that something that should have happened a long time ago had happened today. Lily ate 3 bites of spaghetti and listened with the stillness of a child absorbing something important. Then she said, So they know you were telling the truth? Yes, he said. She thought about this. Did they say sorry? He paused. Thought about the boardroom, the vote. Victoria's handshake. In their way, he said. That's not really the same, Lily said. No, he admitted. It's not. She ate another bite. But it's better than nothing. Yeah, he said. It's better than nothing. She seemed to accept this as the reasonable adult compromise it was. Then Sophie texted me. Well, she texted you. Because I don't have a phone. But it was for me. She wants to know if I can come over Saturday. I know, Daniel said. I think we can make that work. Lily nodded, matter of fact, as if the weekend had just been organized the way she required. Later, after dinner, after the dishes, after Lily was in bed with the lights out, and her library book open on her chest, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and looked at the stack of bills, and the small white card that was still there, moved to the side now, its purpose long since fulfilled. He looked at it for a moment, then he picked it up and held it. He thought about a Thursday evening, and $11, and a cold girl on a planter box, and his daughter unzipping her jacket with the particular moral certainty of someone who had not yet learned to talk herself out of the right thing. He thought about the archive server sitting quietly in the background of a corporate system for 8 months, holding the truth the way a safe holds what's been put in its keeping. He thought about Tom Reardon putting down a rack sticker image he'd carried in his head for a year. He set the card back down. He looked at the bills. Then he opened his laptop and sent Patricia Lowe a message. Ready to review the framework document when you send it. Looking forward to next week. He closed the laptop. He turned off the kitchen light. He stood in the dark for a moment, in his own house, in the ordinary quiet of a night that was different from the night before it, not in any dramatic or visible way, but in the specific way that things are different when a weight has been put down after a very long time of carrying it. He went to bed. He slept. The framework document arrived at 11:47 p. That same night. Daniel saw the notification on his phone and almost didn't open it until morning. Then he thought about Patricia Lowe sending a detailed contract framework at nearly midnight on a Wednesday, and figured that the professional courtesy owed to a woman like that was to at least open the email. He sat up in bed and read it. It was 43 pages. He read all 43 pages. By the time he finished, it was 1:20, and he was sitting at the kitchen table with a pen and a legal pad he'd found in the junk drawer, and he had 14 pages of notes. Not complaints, not objections. Specific, concrete additions, gaps in the proposed framework where his experience as an inspector told him the document was describing a system that looked right on paper but would fail at the contact point with actual human behavior in actual warehouses, where actual people were being asked to move things quickly under pressure. He knew those contact points. He had spent 6 years living in them. He wrote for an hour and a half. Then he emailed Patricia a summary of his notes, not the 14 pages, just the summary, 2 paragraphs, specific and clean, and he went to bed and slept better than he had in 8 months. Patricia replied at 6:14 a.m. "This is exactly why Victoria wanted you for this project. See you Monday." He showed the email to no one. He put his phone in his pocket and made Lily's breakfast and drove her to school and went to his last day at the garden supply warehouse. Because he had told them he'd finish the week, and he was not a man who left things unfinished. Saturday arrived the way significant things sometimes do, quietly, without announcement, looking exactly like an ordinary morning until you were already inside it. Lily was up at 7, which was 45 minutes earlier than she needed to be, and she appeared in the kitchen doorway already dressed, which had never happened in the history of Saturday mornings. "You're ready," Daniel said. "I've been ready since 6:30, Lily said, with the dignity of someone who found this unremarkable. "It's 7. I know." He looked at her. She had put on her second-best sweater, the blue one with the small buttons at the collar which she wore for occasions she had privately decided were important. She had also brushed her hair without being asked, which Daniel noted and filed away, as evidence of the specific power Sophie Mitchell had acquired over his daughter in the span of one diner dinner and several text message exchanges. "Should we talk about the plan?" Lily asked. "The plan for what?" "For going to Sophie's." She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded, which was a posture she had never naturally assumed in her life. "I've been thinking about it." "Okay," Daniel said, pouring coffee. "I think we should not make a big deal about the house," she said. Sophie said, "It's big. And I don't want her to feel weird about it." Daniel looked at his daughter. "That's thoughtful of you. Also, I looked up what a rolling library ladder is," Lily continued, "and I've decided I want one eventually. But I'm not going to say that immediately." Showing real restraint, I know. She unfolded her hands. "Do you think they'll have cornbread?" "Probably not the same kind." Lily absorbed this philosophical reality. "That's okay," she said, with the tone of someone accepting a minor but genuine loss. "Different can still be good." He drove them to the address Victoria had texted him. He had looked it up because he was a practical man who liked to know what he was walking into, and the satellite view had told him plainly that big was doing significant work as a descriptor. He had prepared himself. He had thought he was prepared. The house was significant. Not ostentatious in the way that wealth sometimes announces itself, but the kind of significant that is quieter and therefore harder to dismiss. Long driveway, trees, the kind of stillness that costs money. Lily looked at it through the windshield without speaking. Daniel pulled up to the front and turned off the engine. "Okay?" he asked. Lily was quiet for 2 seconds. Then, "Sophie lives here, and she's never been to a public library." "Different kinds of lives," Daniel said. "Yeah." Lily unfastened her seatbelt. "That's kind of sad, maybe. Or maybe just different." "Dad, yeah." She laughed at the cornbread thing, Lily said. Like, really laughed. "You don't do that if you're just being nice." "No," Daniel agreed. "You don't." Lily nodded once firmly, like she'd settled something. Then she opened her door and got out. Sophie opened the front door before they rang the bell, which meant she had been watching for them. She was in jeans and a sweatshirt, the most normal clothes Daniel had seen her in, and she had apparently given up on looking composed the moment she saw Lily because her face broke into something immediate and unguarded. "You're here," Sophie said. "Obviously," Lily said, and held up her hand for the Thunderbird handshake. Sophie did it perfectly, complete with the snap. Lily was deeply satisfied. Victoria appeared behind Sophie, dressed in the same version of herself she'd been in the coffee shop present, composed, and underneath the composure, something that had gotten warmer in the weeks since the boardroom. She looked at Daniel, and there was a moment of recognition between them. Not the recognition of the diner, when they'd been strangers, but the recognition of people who had been through something together and had come out on the other side knowing what the other person was made of. Daniel, she said. Victoria. She stepped back and let them in. The interior of the house was exactly what the exterior suggested, and also, somehow, not what he'd expected. It was beautiful in the specific way of a home that had been furnished by someone with excellent taste and then lived in by a child. The careful arrangements, interrupted, at intervals by Sophie's presence, by drawings left on tables, by a pair of shoes in the middle of a hallway, by a book splayed open on a window seat, like it had been set down in the middle of something urgent. It was a house, not a showroom. Daniel had been braced for a showroom. The distinction mattered to him in a way he couldn't immediately articulate. The girls disappeared upstairs within 4 minutes. Sophie wanted to show Lily the library ladder. Daniel heard Lily's voice from above, not words, just the quality of it, the particular pitch she hit when something genuinely surprised and delighted her. Then the sound of something rolling, a small shriek, and both of them laughing. She loves it, Victoria said, looking up at the ceiling with the sound of the laughing moving through it. She'll want one now, Daniel said. She can practice on that one as much as she wants. They went to the kitchen. Because that was the room, the conversation naturally moved toward the specific domestic gravity of a kitchen that pulled serious conversations toward it, away from the formal rooms with their good furniture. Victoria poured coffee without asking. He sat at the counter. She stood on the other side of it. The OSHA reinvestigation is formally opened, she said. As of Thursday, Patricia told me, he said. She moves fast. It's why I keep her. Victoria set her coffee down. There's going to be media attention when the OSHA findings become public. The timeline on that is probably 6 to 8 weeks. The story will get out: Richard's removal, the archive evidence, the settlement with Marcus Webb being revisited. She looked at him steadily. Your name will be in it. The accurate version this time. But it will be in it. I know, he said. I've made my peace with that. Have you thought about Lily? He looked at his coffee cup. She's 9. She knows the basic shape of what happened, that people said her dad did something he didn't do, and that it got fixed. She doesn't need the media version of it. He paused. When it gets more visible, I'll talk to her. She can handle more than people think. Victoria nodded. Sophie is the same way. She paused. I underestimated that for a long time. I thought protecting her meant keeping things away from her. I'm learning it means being honest about what the things actually are. She looked at him. Sophie told me last week that she always knew I was worried. She said she spent a lot of time trying not to add to it. A pause, quiet and significant. She's 8. She was managing my anxiety for me. Daniel was quiet. Kids do that, he said, when they love you. They read you and they adjust. He paused. Lily does it too. She learned to look at my face a certain way. I hate that she had to learn that. Victoria's hands moved around her cup. We do the best we can with what we have, she said. And then we try to do better when we know better. Yeah, he said. That's about all there is. Upstairs, the library ladder rolled again. More laughing. The house held the sound of it the way good houses hold the sounds of children, openly, without effort, like it was what the walls were for. They talked for an hour. Not about the review, not about the contract, not about OSHA or Richard Hale or the legal proceedings that were still unwinding through their various channels. They talked about the ordinary things about Lily's school, and the dolphin argument, and the public library, about Sophie's tutors, and how Sophie had recently, quietly, told Victoria she wanted to try a real school because she missed being around other kids, about the specific and irreducible difficulty of raising a child alone, the way loneliness and love existed in the same space without resolving each other, the way you could be entirely present for another person, and still feel, at intervals, like you were standing slightly outside the warmth of the world. They talked like people who had earned the right to be honest with each other. At noon, Victoria said she'd promised Sophie lunch and asked if they were staying. He called up the stairs, and Lily materialized at the top landing, with her hair slightly disheveled from what appeared to have been enthusiastic rolling, and a look on her face that said the answer was obviously yes, and the question was barely worth asking. Lunch was sandwiches at the kitchen counter, not catered, not staffed, Victoria making them with the focused competence of a woman who had decided that this particular Saturday she was going to make sandwiches. And that was that. Sophie and Lily sat on the counter stools and argued companionably about whether tomato belonged in a sandwich. A debate that revealed strongly held positions on both sides and no clear path to resolution. Daniel sat across from Victoria, and they ate and listened to the girls argue, and the quality of the afternoon was something he did not have a word for, something between ordinary and extraordinary, something that was exactly what it was, and did not need to be named or explained. After lunch, Lily said, with the casualness of someone proposing something she'd been planning, "For the last 40 minutes, Sophie, do you want to come to our diner sometime? The one where we met?" Sophie looked at her mother. Victoria looked at Daniel. He shrugged. One shoulder, the particular shrug that said, "It's a good idea. I didn't suggest it, but it's a good idea." "I'd like that," Victoria said. "We go on Thursdays mostly," Lily said back to Sophie, "because Dad does deliveries, Friday through Sunday. But now maybe not." She looked at Daniel with a slight frown. "Dad, are you still doing the deliveries?" The room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when a child has accidentally opened a door that adults were being careful about. Daniel looked at his daughter. He looked at Victoria, whose expression was carefully neutral in the way that said she was aware of the weight of the moment. He looked back at Lily. "Not after this week," he said. Lily processed this. "Because of the new job?" "The new contract," he said. "Yes." Lily looked at him for 2 more seconds with her mother's eyes, doing the reading. Then she turned back to Sophie and said, "So, Thursday's work. And Carol makes really good cornbread. I'll explain the rules before we go." Sophie said solemnly, "I've been thinking about the rules." "Good," Lily said. "There's going to be a test." The afternoon kept going the way good afternoons do, past the point where you expected it to end, deeper into the ordinary magic of a day that had decided not to be over yet. At 3:30, Victoria received a call she had to take something operational. 15 minutes of precise and efficient decision-making that she conducted in the hallway, while Sophie showed Lily the garden through the back door, pointing at things and explaining their names with the authority of someone who had learned them from books, rather than from a grandmother who grew them, which gave the explanation a particular, endearing precision. Daniel stood near the back door and watched his daughter and this other girl stand side by side, pointing at plants they both recognized, and neither of them had grown, and he thought about the specific arithmetic of how they had gotten here. A cold Thursday box, full of dead marigolds, $11, and a jacket with a turtle on the collar. He thought about how close he had come to not stopping. He knew himself well enough to know that. There had been 3 seconds in the gravel lot when he had looked at Sophie and done the math and felt the pull of the practical, the $11, the granola bar, the bills on the counter. 3 seconds. He had stopped. He didn't know what the version of himself that didn't stop looked like. He didn't want to know. Victoria came back from the call, and her composure was back in its full operational state, but she caught him looking at the girls through the door, and something in her face softened at the edges. "She's different with Lily," Victoria said quietly, standing beside him. "Sophie, she's lighter. Lily does that," Daniel said. "She has her mother's way of making people feel like they're allowed to be exactly who they are." Victoria was quiet for a second. "That's a remarkable thing to pass on." "Sarah was a remarkable person," he said simply. "Without performance." "Tell me about her sometime," Victoria said. Not with the careful social weight of a condolence, with the direct, genuine curiosity of someone who actually wanted to know. "I will," he said, and he meant it. 3 weeks later, the preliminary OSHA findings were released. They were not leaked, not shaped, not managed through a communications team. They were released as findings, which is to say as facts, in the specific dry language of regulatory documentation that somehow carried more weight than any amount of dramatic prose. The findings confirmed systematic alteration safety documentation at the Harris Creek site, evidence of executive-level authorization for non-compliant installation timelines, specific violations in load capacity certification. The findings cited Daniel Carter's original reports by name, by date, with specific reference to the March 14th document, as accurate, thorough, and materially predictive of the rack failure that occurred 43 days after their submission. 43 days, the math of it. If anyone had listened, there were 43 days in which the outcome could have been different. The story reached local media first, then business press, then, because the elements of it were what they were: a billionaire, a whistleblower, a deleted archive, a diner. 2 daughters, it reached the kind of outlets that told human stories to large audiences. Daniel did not speak to any of them. He had been advised by Patricia not to, and even without the advice, he would not have. He had not spent 8 months fighting to be seen accurately, so that he could spend the next 8 weeks being simplified. He gave one statement, through Patricia, short and specific: "I filed accurate reports to protect the workers in that facility. That was my job, and I did it. I am grateful that the truth of what happened has been formally established, and I hope it results in systems that protect the next inspector who tries to do the same." That was all. Richard Hale's attorney put out a statement saying his client was cooperating with authorities and contested certain characterizations of the evidence. The statement was 4 paragraphs long and contained in Daniel's assessment no actual information. Marcus Webb did speak to one reporter, a local television journalist who had covered workplace safety issues for years and who approached the story with the specific seriousness it deserved. Marcus's interview was 4 minutes long and contained, in those 4 minutes, more truth than Richard Hale's attorney's statement had managed in 4 paragraphs. Marcus talked about the morning of the accident, about his daughter's drawing on the refrigerator, about the $50,000 and what it had asked him to be silent about. He talked about the archive server, the way people talk about something they can't entirely believe is real, the specific improbability of truth that survives despite the active efforts of powerful people to destroy it. That server was just sitting there, Marcus said, on television, to a journalist who was listening with her full attention. For 8 months, holding everything, all Daniel had to say. He paused. "I used to believe that if you buried something deep enough and long enough, it stopped existing. I don't believe that anymore." Daniel watched the interview on his laptop at the kitchen table at 9:15 p. On a Tuesday, Lily was asleep. The bills on the counter were fewer now, not gone, not erased, but fewer, and the math had changed enough that he was no longer running the numbers every morning with the specific clank anxiety of a man calculating how long he could keep the lights on. He closed the laptop and sat with the quiet for a moment. Then his phone buzzed. "Victoria, Marcus's interview just aired. Have you seen it?" He typed back, "Just finished watching." 3 seconds. Then "He's a good man," typed. "Yes, he is." Another pause. Then "The contractor for the rack stickers was formally charged today. 3 counts. Patricia says Richard's cooperation agreement with the DA is contingent on a full disclosure, which means more charges are likely before the end of the month." Daniel read this twice. He thought about Richard Hale at 11:47 at night, in front of a screen, deleting files. He thought about the specific moral arithmetic of a person who had seen the rack sticker report, who had known about the load capacity violations, who had read Daniel's March 14th email, who had read all 7 of them, and made the decision to proceed with the timeline anyway, because the money attached to the deadline was more real to him than the people working beneath the racks. He did not feel satisfaction about the charges. He had thought he would. What he felt was something quieter, not peace exactly, but the absence of the specific grinding weight of injustice that had been pressing on him for 8 months. The absence of it was its own thing. It took up space in a different way. He typed back, "Thank you for telling me." "Victoria, how's the framework coming?" He almost laughed. He typed, 47 pages of notes and counting. "I'll have the revised draft to you by Friday." "Victoria, I expected Thursday." He typed, "Patricia said Friday." "Victoria, Patricia is being generous. Thursday." He put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and did almost laugh this time. A quiet private thing. Just for the kitchen and the dark, and the specific absurdity of being managed to a deadline by 2 formidable women at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. He picked the phone back up. He typed Thursday. He sent the draft Thursday morning at 7:48 a.m. 71 pages, comprehensive, built not from theory, but from 6 years of walking actual warehouse floors and knowing where the systems failed, not because of malice, but because of the gap between what a policy said and what a person under pressure did. He had written it with that gap in mind, closing it, specifically and practically, not with more paperwork, but the kind of structural change that made the right thing easier to do than the wrong thing. Patricia called at noon. "I've read 50 pages," she said. "This is not a framework document. This is a policy architecture." "It's both," he said. "The framework is the architecture." "Victoria is going to read this tonight," Patricia said. "I'm going to warn you in advance that she will call you at some point this weekend with specific questions about Section 4, Subsection 3, the reporting chain structure." "I'll be ready," he said. "She will have a lot of questions," Patricia said. "I documented my reasoning for every decision," he said. "She can ask whatever she wants." A pause. "Daniel." Patricia said his first name rarely. When she did, it meant something. "This is good work. Independent of everything else. This is genuinely good work." He was quiet for a second. It had been a long time since someone in a professional context had said that to him about something he'd done. He had not known, until this moment, exactly how long it had been, or how much it had cost him. "Thank you, Patricia," he said. "Thursday next week," she said. "Victoria wants to walk through it in person." He showed up to the Mitchell Global building on Thursday wearing the good jacket again. He walked in through the lobby past the reception desk, and this time he did not wait in room 4B. This time Patricia walked him directly to Victoria's office, a room with large windows and a desk that was covered in the specific organized chaos of a person who was actively thinking documents, open laptops, a coffee cup that had been moved 3 times in the last hour, based on the rings it had left. Victoria stood up when he came in. "Section 4, she said without preamble. "Subsection 3, the chain of reporting bypasses divisional operations directors entirely." "Intentionally," he said. "Walk me through why." He sat down. "Because in every case where safety reporting failed, at a systemic level, Harris Creek included the failure point was the divisional director. Not because divisional directors are inherently dishonest, because they have competing pressures, timeline pressure, budget pressure, the specific pressure of being evaluated on outcomes that safety concerns delay." He set his copy of the draft on the desk. "If the reporting chain runs through the person who is most incentivized to downgrade the concern, the chain is structurally compromised from the beginning. You have to take them out of the loop entirely." Victoria looked at the document, then at him. "The divisional directors are going to resist this." "Yes," he said, "they will, because it reduces their authority." "How do you recommend handling that?" "By making it clear that the change is not a statement about their character," he said. "It's a statement about the structure. Nobody in that role can be expected to consistently prioritize a safety flag over a timeline deadline when their own performance review is tied to the timeline. That's not a moral failing, it's a structural one. Fix the structure." He paused. "The resistance will be loud for about 3 months. After that, when the system catches 2 or 3 things that would have previously been suppressed, and nobody gets hurt, and no rack falls down, and no archive server has to hold deleted files, for 8 months the resistance fades." Victoria was quiet, looking at the document, then at him, then back at the document. "You've thought about this for a long time," she said. 6 years while I was doing the job," he said. 8 months while I was angry about losing it." She looked at him. "The anger was useful," he said. "I didn't waste it." She smiled. "Not the small controlled thing from the diner or the coffee shop. Something fuller. Something that reached everything." "No," she said. "You didn't." They worked through the document for 2.5 hours. She asked the right questions and pushed on the right places, and twice caught things he had not caught himself, which he noted and revised on the spot with a pen because he was still a man who revised things with a pen. At 2:30 she closed her copy and sat back and looked at him. "This is the job," she said. "You understand that?" "I understand that. Not the consulting contract. The actual job. Permanent position. Full authority over safety compliance across all 3 subsidiaries. Reporting directly to me." She said it plainly, without flourish, the way she said everything that mattered. "This is what I want to offer you. Not because of what happened. Because of what I just read and what you just explained to me for 2.5 hours. She paused. On the merits, as you required. Daniel sat still for a long moment. He thought about the 7 reports. He thought about the termination meeting. He thought about the granola bar at 2 o'clock and the $11 and the cracked driveway and Lily in the back seat watching his face. He thought about sitting at the kitchen table at 9:30 at night, the bills a little fewer, the framework document open on his laptop, the specific feeling of a man who had been handed back the thing he was built to do. Yes, he said. Victoria nodded, once, like it was settled. Monday, she said. Patricia will have the formal offer ready. He drove home. He picked Lily up from school. She came out the front doors with her backpack and her 3 folders, and she looked at his face, the way she always looked at his face reading the weather, and she stopped on the sidewalk and looked at him carefully for 2 full seconds. Dad, she said, yeah, your face is different. He looked at his daughter, at her mother's eyes, wide and dark, and seeing everything. Good different or bad different? He asked. Lily considered him with great seriousness. Then she said, good different. Like when you fixed the porch step. Like when something that was broken is actually fixed. He opened the truck door for her. Yeah, he said. That's about right. She got in. She buckled herself. She put her folders in her lap. Can we go to Rudy's tonight, she said. I feel like cornbread. He started the truck. Yeah, he said. Let's go to Rudy's. They went to Rudy's. Carol was working, because Carol was always working, and she looked up when they came in and nodded at Daniel in the particular way she'd been nodding at him since the night he'd pushed $11 across the counter and told her Sophie was with him, the nod of a woman who had decided on something about a person and had not been given a reason to revise it. She brought them the cornbread without being asked. Lily arranged it the way she always arranged it, break, not cut, no butter until you're ready, and she ate it with the focused satisfaction of someone performing a ritual correctly. Daniel drank his coffee. He looked around the diner, the 2 old men at the counter, the couple in the window booth, the sound of the kitchen, the particular warmth of a place that was nothing special and was exactly what it was. He thought about a Thursday evening in November when he'd been sitting in this booth with $11 and a 9-year-old, and the official record sitting on his name like a stone. He thought about the cold girl on the planter box. He thought about Lily, walking those 3 feet and holding out a jacket with both hands. He thought about the turtle on the collar. Small embroidered turtle. Sarah's choice, because Lily loves turtles. Daniel, just let her love turtles. He thought about Marcus Webb, putting down an image he'd carried for a year. About Tom Reardon calling his wife. About an archive server sitting quietly in the background of a corporate system, holding the truth with the patience of documented facts. He thought about a man at 11:47 at night, deleting files, believing the story was over. It wasn't over. It was never going to be over, because the truth had been written down, because Daniel Carter was the kind of man who wrote things down, because his father had taught him that paper couldn't be remotely deleted, because 7 time-stamped reports had survived in a backup system that the wrong people hadn't known about, because a cold girl had been sitting outside a diner on a Thursday night, and a struggling father with $11 had decided that the math was not the most important thing. Everything had followed from that. Not because life was fair, or because goodness was automatically rewarded, or because the right people always ended up in the right rooms. Those things were not reliably true, and Daniel Carter was not a man who required them to be. But this was true. One act of ordinary decency had set a chain of events in motion that could not be stopped, that could not be deleted, that had moved through the world with the specific and unstoppable force of things that are real and documented and witnessed. He had been invisible for 8 months, and then he hadn't been. And then the truth he'd written down had been read by the right person at the right moment, and everything had changed. Lily looked up from her cornbread. Dad, she said, can we invite Sophie and Victoria next Thursday? He thought about Victoria Mitchell sitting in this booth. He thought about the word neighbor, which he had said on a Thursday night that had started with $11 and ended with a card in his shirt pocket, and a woman already asking questions in the back of a black SUV. Yeah, he said, let's do that. Lily took out her phone, his old phone, which he'd passed down to her. when the
not concentrating on no one suspect,
and started typing a message to Sophie with the focused determination of someone making plans that were not going to be unmade. Daniel drank his coffee. Outside, the December air was cold. Inside, the radiator worked. The cornbread was warm. His daughter was happy, specifically and genuinely happy, the kind of happy that is not performed for a parent, but is simply the natural condition of a child who feels safe. Daniel Carter was a man who had lost almost everything, who had been told by an official record that the losses were his own fault, who had carried that record like a stone for 8 months and had gone to work anyway, and paid his bills anyway, and raised his daughter anyway, and kept the logs in his spiral notebook anyway, because he was the kind of man his father had raised and his wife had loved and his daughter was learning to be. The kind of man who wrote things down with a pen because paper couldn't be remotely deleted, because what is true does not stop being true, because powerful people find it inconvenient. Because a man who does his job right in an empty warehouse at 6 in the morning where no one is watching is the same man he is in a boardroom, and that sameness is not weakness. It is the only kind of strength that actually holds. He had started with nothing. He had been reduced to less than nothing. And he had kept going, kept documenting, kept being exactly who he was not, because he believed it would be rewarded, but because he did not know how to be anyone else. And in the end, that had been enough. Not the revenge. Not the removal of Richard Hale. Not the job or the contract or the 71 pages of policy architecture that was going to make the next warehouse safer for the next Marcus Webb before the rack came down. The enough was simpler. The enough was Lily across the table, eating cornbread correctly, and texting Sophie, and not watching his face for signs of distress, because there were no signs to watch for. The enough was a man who had been ground down to nothing, and had kept his integrity through all of it, and had come out the other side, still recognizably himself. That was everything. That was enough. That was all that had ever needed to be true.